Would you get everything settled?
Oh, all sorts of, we solved all the problems in the world.
All right.
Climate change too.
Good.
Just because we're here.
All right. Good
That was
afternoon,
nothing.
commissioners.
You're going to
Welcome
send
back.
us a memo, right?
Back to you, Chair Harrington.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. Welcome back to work session, everyone. We have a few different large topics to get to this afternoon and hoping to be completed by 4 p.m. So the first one is a summary of Governor Kotek's executive orders 23-2, 3, and 4 related to homelessness and housing.
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Commissioners.
Hi there.
My name is Komi Calvo, I'm Housing Director. I'm joined by Josh Grice, and there's some other colleagues in the audience that may.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, so we don't know too much yet about the emergency declaration. We are working with the staff, talking to other housing authorities and housing agencies in the state. So I think there's one slide that summarizes.
Next slide. There you go.
So the first one, 23-04, is about increasing housing supply by 80%. So this is a goal to build 36,000 units of housing annually. We have since the declaration found out that the private sector, we're doing about half of that or more. This is what we are getting from staff. In terms of where the burden is, which is in the metro area, and how the math figures out, we are not sure yet. We do know the metro bond is 653 million.
Thank you for that reminder.
And the goal for that is 3,900 units. So I don't want to get too mathematical here, but it is a tall order, dollar-wise. The second one is 23-02, state of emergency in counties with 50% increase in unsheltered homelessness. And that includes Washington County.
And this one, 02, only pertains to a certain number of regions in the state.
Correct.
But the other two pertain statewide.
Correct.
And this is where you define the region that we're in. And can you do that one more time?
Yes, so for the executive order itself combines 3 continuum of care regions into a Portland metropolitan region. So Portland, Gresham, Multnomah County, Hillsborough, Beaverton, Washington County, and Clackamas County collectively as the metro region. So these regions are the metro region continuum of cares, Central Oregon, Eugene, Springfield, Lane County as one, Medford, Ashland, Jackson County as another, and Salem, Marion, and Polk counties as the fifth. And these are referred to in the subsequent executive order as the emergency area.
Yes.
I'm looking at it here. Thank
So
you.
it's a couple of them have these reference points to one another. Not to interrupt your flow, but
it's
just know I'm starting to get my head around this. I think it's going to be a collective effort.
Yeah.
And 23-03 is the executive order. It's talking about unsheltered homelessness, addressing that directly. And so, so behavioral health care is tied in very, very deeply with this one. So increasing services and access, because a lot of addiction, mental illness, all of that are behavioral health. There's also shelter capacity and rent assistance. So I think we're doing very fine on that here in Washington County, thanks to the SHS. And then invest in areas with increases in homelessness. So this is our region against, I think Central Oregon had a 150% increase. So they have their own challenges in the Bend area as well. And the last one, which involves other agencies, emergency management, state housing, DLCD, land use conservation, and a number of state agencies will convene an advisory council and that's to be done before spring this year. So when we hear more, we'll come back and share it. Josh?
Yeah, I think Josh Kreitz, Assistant Director of the Housing Department, sorry. Just a couple things. As Comey mentioned, we don't know the nuts and bolts of this. Right now, there are emergency orders, there's some words here. We will know more over the upcoming weeks and months what this is going to look like operationally, how this is actually going to be implemented on the ground. I was just going to highlight something for your board, which I think is unique in Washington County and why I think Washington County can flex to any partnership with the state on these executive orders, which is the amount of partnership that I see in Washington County between all the different departments. Routinely, the housing department is working with land use and transportation, with health and human services, with solid waste. There's sheriff's department. So I just think and emergency, obviously we went through COVID. We worked so closely standing up all these emergency homeless programs for COVID. So I think we're really well positioned as a county to implement this as soon as we start learning more about the operations. And that's something unique. I think your board knows that. I just want to highlight it because that's not the case everywhere else. And it's not the case in other places that I've had the pleasure to work in my career. I'm gonna do a little switcheroo with Jess real quick because she also had an opportunity to talk with some folks in the governor's office, and she could just bring a little bit more information to the table.
Good afternoon, Board. Jess Larson, Supportive Housing Services Program Manager. As Josh said, I was able to connect with Taylor Smiley-Wolf in the governor's office. She's leading the housing work under the governor and is a great partner of ours, previously leading policy work with Home for the Multnomah County Housing Authority. So she was able to give a little extra context and going over these goals here that have been clearly stated by the governor. We can understand what the intention is behind this emergency declaration and the goals that we will all be asked to work towards achieving with urgency and dedicated focus. She reminded me, as someone who doesn't work with emergency declarations very often, that this is work that the state is familiar with in partnership with our cities and counties. And so we have our colleague John Wheeler with the Office of Emergency Management calling in, and there is strong precedent for these kinds of procedures of activating under an emergency order. So we'll be using those structures and practices and that partnership we know well, but just applying it to a housing and homeless services system lens. And she reminded us that there's important next steps for the legislature to take around funding considerations to be able to move forward with any clear action. And in the meantime, we as a county can prepare by doing an assessment of our capacity and our needs to be able to effectively move forward on these three goals. And the good news, as Josh and Comey, our director, have described, is we've been doing this work. We have a list of shovel-ready projects. We have a list of goals in housing, rehousing placements. And so we can be pretty clear and specific with our state partners on what are the immediate actions we could take with additional resource and capacity from the state. So it was a clear direction, or Taylor's guidance for us was sit tight and get ready. More information coming soon.
Go ahead.
I do want to just underscore John Wheeler, emergency manager, is on Zoom. Thank you for being on Zoom, and it's better he's on Zoom today than in person. We need to take care of each other during these times. I do want to just underscore the role of the emergency management and allow John to maybe speak to that a bit, because this is putting in place the incident command structure.
Yes, please. Thank you for joining us, John. Please take it away.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, members of the board. For the record, I'm John Wheeler, manager of Washington County Emergency Management. Marnie asked me to suggest that I speak here today because Oregon Emergency Management had a briefing last Thursday about the executive order. And so I learned some additional information from that. The noteworthy thing about the O2 executive order is it puts Oregon Emergency Management in a lead role as the lead coordinating agency for this emergency. The one thing I learned on Thursday is that OEM clarified that they're just in a coordination role. The Oregon Housing and Community Services will continue to be the lead agency for the housing challenge and in this housing emergency. Oregon Emergency Management is primarily just going to serve as a coordination role and use some of the emergency management systems that are in place in the state to coordinate state agencies and the assistance of state agencies to support OHCS and to support local governments as well. The other noteworthy thing that they clarified in this briefing is that the state is going to use its disaster recovery framework as the primary model to manage this emergency. As opposed to its emergency operations plan. It's where, so in other words, we didn't hear that the state's emergency coordination center is going to be activated. They're primarily going to use a disaster recovery framework in order to organize this response. And that was exercised in the wildfires following the 2020 wildfires, and it was an effective way using some planning systems that they have in place to ensure that there's really effective integration between all levels of government. And so that's what we expect will be used in this for this incident. The other thing they mentioned this in the order, and the OEM clarified it, was we are going to use the state's resource ordering and resource management system to coordinate resources. So the same system that we used, for example, to request personal protective equipment and that kind of thing from the state for the COVID emergency is the same tool that would be available for resources and assistance and services from the state for this emergency incident as well. So I think those are the highlights from that briefing. Again, like Jess and Josh mentioned, we're in a good position here locally to, with our organization, with our network and our relationships to leverage the organization that the state has done with executive order. So I think we're in a good position to take advantage of that. And as Jess said, we just need to get ready and assess our current capabilities here locally.
So if I could also share a couple of things, and it's really by way of clarity. The first executive order 02, if you think about money and what effect is funding involved on 23-02, it instructs the Oregon Housing and Community Services to repurpose up to $40 million in funds. This is beyond the exemption from competitive procurement. So really, that's for the subset of the state. Those are the only identified resources that are being brought to bear with regard to this 1-year effort to try and reduce homelessness just from that item. And the reason that I mention this is, unlike 03 and 04, those do apply statewide. So some parts of the state are like, why weren't we included? We have homeless problems too. But the executive orders have really tried to address that threshold of what portions of the state have seen a greater than 50% increase in the timeframe that's listed. On 04, that's the one that talks about the framework and having the framework proposed by April 1st and then an action plan by the end of the year. So There are 17 members. There are 25 members total on this new council. But 17 of them will be coming from different identified expertise areas. And I know we have a lot of folks in our state that are also identified experts. But April 1st, that deadline of April 1st is really only about 9 weeks away. So there's a lot of work for them to do. So I appreciated, Comey, your context of the Metro bond dollars and the unit goals there. So let's see, and not in the executive orders, but in the media release, the governor also stated a call to action, a proposal to the state legislature for $130 million to help get 1,200 individuals off the streets within 1 year. That is just a challenge to the legislature to develop the proposal to reach that need. And so that funding has not been identified and is not restricted to just the areas in the, as I understand it, in 23-02 versus the whole state. It's not listed in the 3 emergency orders. So with one of my learnings from emergency orders of the last few years is read the orders. Don't make assumptions about what is included and not included. So as we continue to hear from our local elected peers, really encourage folks to read the executive orders. So, and Ms. Angie, please do ensure that through staff briefings, staff memos, and time on the work session to come back in and engage with us on this. We'll go from there. I have way too many assumptions about what this does and what this doesn't do. So I'm hoping that some of the, despite these executive orders, we're still going to be challenged to find the case managers we need to help get folks the resources they need to get off of the streets and into the whatever realm of stable housing is available. I've not heard from our team that we're lacking vouchers for hotels. You continue to do a lot of work to try and get emergency shelters going. I'm assuming, using the example I used earlier today with Hillsborough asking the legislature with $3 million to get the Hillsborough shelter going, that maybe that financial need can be met so that shelter can be constructed and open before the end of the year to contribute to that kind of goal. You know, that kind of problem solving, it really continues to be an all hands on deck. Is there any, well, first, always feel free to correct anything I've said in case I got it wrong. But also, is there anything more that the board can do to help you in this challenging work that you're doing on behalf of our community or in service to our community?
So I'd really like to hear from our housing team or emergency management answer to that question. I have received questions, should the board pass a similar emergency declaration? At this point in time, staff are not seeing that need. I have appreciated since starting in August 2020, that question coming up from time to time. We have had during the wildfires, and Commissioner Fye, for context, I had to take action that the board then held a special meeting to ratify thereafter the actions that I had taken. So we have mechanics in place between the county administration office and county council that if there would be something that an immediate emergency declaration would need to be established, there could be an emergency meeting, or there's mechanics for me to take action and then the board to ratify my actions thereafter. So I want to just share that as I know other jurisdictions are starting to talk about, should they pass an emergency declaration at this time? And from a staff perspective, we're not seeing that need right now.
Go ahead.
Well, I need to have a little basic understanding of emergency orders. So these 3 that we have here expire in a year. So I'm assuming that's as long as an emergency order can go.
Good question. I'll look though.
Okay. Second thing is there is money that's been designated in these emergency orders. Well, it's a lot of money. Well, it's 40 million, it's 130 millions.
That in the.
Well, I didn't see it in here, but
It's
so I'm just wondering if that has to go through the state budget process and be approved so the governor can say, I want to designate $130 million to this, but legislature has to approve that? Is that the way that works?
That's our understanding, yes.
Okay.
That he's gonna go through the biennial budget process.
So that would imply that we have 2 years to spend that money when the executive order is only 1 year. So I don't know. I guess that's what I'm asking for, a better understanding of how executive orders work. I'd like to know how an executive order would work if we as a county adopted an executive order. And so I'm just trying to figure out, these are, they call them BHAGs, big audacious orders that the governor has tossed out there. And there's obviously a lot of concern about whether or not we can meet these or not. So what happens then? And I guess when we talk about providing more shelter for our homeless community, that means we're going to have more shelter available, and we have difficulties finding places to locate shelters. And so is there going to be a relaxation of requirements? So we're going to take away maybe some landowners' rights on this to site a shelter? I mean, I'm just wondering how this all works, because I know that we're having trouble, you know, with the NIMBY part of this process. And so I'm just wondering how this whole thing works.
I don't know much. I wouldn't claim to know it all, but I do know the chair did mention about a housing council, 25 member. And the state agencies that are going to be handling this includes the land conservation and development also. So they deal with land use. There's going to be a need to address that. And
there is no deadline on that one. The 1 year pertains to the first 2.
Yeah, 23. Well, yeah. And I guess along with that, are we going to have somebody appointed from Washington County to this Housing Production Advisory Council? Are we going to advocate for that, or are we going to participate with that?
So the governor makes the appointments. So we're talking about 23-04.
Correct.
Section 3G. And so there are local governments, and that doesn't say that it would be elected officials.
I was thinking staffing, because you have to have an expertise in this.
Yeah.
And so I was
The answer to
thinking,
the question is, we don't know yet.
okay. I guess if we were asked, would we say yes? We'd like to do that. Or if we would advocate, would we advocate that we have someone on this? Kind of not waiting for the governor to make a decision, but maybe put a couple of hints in there that, yeah, we'd like to have somebody appointed or not. So, I don't want to add to your workload, but seems like a pretty important council.
I think we're trying to figure out how these three work together and how the governor's administration would like to proceed in terms of having these three together. As I mentioned earlier, the council will need to be formed and work on its framework proposal by that April 1st date. And they have had other statewide housing advisory committees before. So they may leverage those members or not.
May I offer, Commissioner and Chair, I believe that if our team is asked to serve, we would be eager to fulfill that request of the governor. But I think there's, as the chair says, more to find out about who is desired to be represented on this commission, on this council. In either case, though, our team has a very strong relationship, both with staff emerging in the governor's office, and then also the State Department, the Office of Housing and Community Services, and we'll maintain those relations and close communication to learn more as there's more to be understood and more work to do.
Okay, thank you.
I think the interesting thing about balancing that committee would be the number of people on that committee that are housed versus the unhoused, and then the developers that actually have a track record of producing affordable houses. So I think that will be the dynamic for the governor and her team to balance that voices. So, I mean, if Washington County were to ask, I would certainly support that. But I think my eyes are set on like balancing those voices on that committee for me.
Yeah, so people with lived experience was not mentioned, but I think the governor appoints up to 17 people, so hopefully that'll be one consideration.
And obviously the rest of them are people in a departmental expertise, so your point's well taken, Nafisa. Little experience in houselessness might be certainly needed to be on that, so good point.
Yeah, I think this is quite fascinating, and I'm wondering from like the continuum care, the call out is for us, Washington County, Hillsborough and Beaverton, and then it says / Washington County, as you know. And I don't mean to create more work for you, Tanya, I'm looking at, but I'm just gonna ask the question is, how are we gonna engage the cities that haven't been called out in those continuum care? Because the responsibility, I'm assuming, sits within Washington County. Are we responsible of communicating? And when I say cities, there's two layers to that. Probably the city managers is one path forward, but then what about the elected officials who need to be educated and it certainly needs to lend their voices here?
So if I could start, when the governor called me about this, with her embargoed information, as I shared on, was that just last Tuesday? I suggested to her that she convene, or her staff convene, a meeting for the elected officials within all these jurisdictions that this pertains to, in order to level set. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, from a staff perspective, I think we're well positioned with, especially with implementation of the SHS dollars. We do meet with on an every other month basis relative to SHS with city managers and other key staff to have convening conversations so that we do have a strong partnership. There is even, I would say, even increased meetings with Beaverton and Hillsborough because they are currently citing shelters. So I would say that is even maybe even more meetings than even with the other cities. So I think we have a good structure in place and good communication networks that we have been forming over the last 2 years. So that's a good foundation to build from. I think with what is on staff's plate, though, we need to continue to focus on what the knowns are. And the knowns are, we need to continue to move forward with our affordable housing, our housing authority suite and our SHS dollars while we're being patient, but yet getting all the information from the state as far as what the three declarations mean without kind of chasing after something that we don't really know what it is yet.
Oh, boy. Yes, executive orders amongst themselves don't actually get the results on the ground. Much work to be done yet.
Sure, can I provide space? I want to, I think we moved on to someone else's question before your question was answered as far as what support does, does the housing team need, if any, in this?
Well, we appreciate the board's support in many of all our work so far, from acquiring hotels to developing housing and getting our contracts for the SHS contractors. And we hope that support continues. Know that everything we bring in front of you is very well vetted and multidisciplinary approach in our department. So we come to you with well-baked material. So we hope we can continue with that support. This is going to mean a lot when the details flesh out in terms of dollars, work. There's going to be work on every level, land use, emergency management, even legislation from your board about, unsheltered camping. So it's work for all of us, and we'll be coming back when we get more information from our colleagues in Salem.
Terrific.
I have a question for you, Tanya, and I'm reflecting back at the last meeting we have had. This declaration and what could we do for those who are on the verge to houselessness? Is there rent moratorium that we can implement, or what or would that include some of the capacity understanding work you're doing right now?
Pardon me. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I know that prevention is one of the top 3 goals of this collection of executive orders. So it's a focus on housing production, a focus on shelter options to reduce unsheltered numbers, and then also a focus on prevention strategies to keep people in housing. So the first thing we look to are funds to provide immediate eviction prevention resources to households who have evictions pending. I think that there's more potentially that could be explored, but I'm not sure that we've begun that consideration yet.
Okay.
I'm going to speak briefly about rent moratoriums because we are part of the housing authorities trade group in the state. There's 22 housing authorities. And we hear from other jurisdictions like Jackson County, Southern Oregon. Their landlords are totally fatigued with, all these moratorium. And so there's a split in the housing authority group, where in the urban areas, you think the situation is dire and you need more, legislation or more moratoriums. And then in other areas, their landlords are threatening to just convert their properties to Airbnbs or sell them. And so there's that tension. That's what I gather from the meetings. It's no clear path to more regulation. That's the landlords provide close to between 80 and 90% of all housing out there, private landlords. So we, the public sector and the nonprofit sector, we cover a little above 10% of the total market. So
The impact.
Yeah. So when the private landlords are fatigued, we got to find creative ways to engage them, and we need them.
Can we take that opportunity for just a reminder? Because we've dealt with a lot over the last 2+ years of the global pandemic.
Mhm.
With both the federal government providing assistance dollars directly to individuals, also through to states and local governments like counties and cities. I recall during COVID, there were rent delays
Mhm.
and other assistance packages. It might be helpful to get the reminder of, here we are in January of 2023. And part of what those actions were was to try and ensure that those people who were out of work would not lose their housing because they were not able to make their rent payment. But I'm remembering prior history. And so I am asking if we could get an update, and it could be by memo, that's fine. Just of what is the state of affairs now here in January of 2023? Does anything continue? Are programs over? Are there any programs that we continue to offer or the state continues to offer? I think that might help ensure that we're all level set on the same circumstances as well.
We'll provide that in a briefing memo, and make sure that briefing memo is also included in my leadership update, because that may be of value to also sharing out just for the community in general, or for you to share out with other partners.
Yes. Does that sound like we're asking for reasonable?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, great. And I know, we had many partners working with us during that time too. So does that sound like it might be useful?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, we heard from the 3 individuals from the housing
Wood Spring? Yep.
spring today with this. I mean, that sounds to me like that conversation would get wrapped into this in some form or fashion if we're going to be talking about eviction notices. I mean, these people could not pay and get an eviction notice. And are we going to step in? Are we going to subsidize rent with them? Are we going to open that door to Pandora's box to me? But I mean, would all of that be wrapped into this discussion?
I wasn't trying to wrap everything into it, but rather as it relates to all the efforts that had been made during the pandemic to reduce
Mhm.
the increasing the number of people who were entering homelessness. And like part of the SHS measure was to address chronic homelessness and to help ensure we weren't increasing homelessness. So we have programs as part of our SHS program that continue. And that's where, the case managers come in and helping people, with our shelters, with vouchers, temporary vouchers, more permanent vouchers, so on and so forth. I didn't mean to interrupt your subject matter expert answer.
No interruption at all, Chair. In fact, much of that is planned content for I believe it's February 7th programmatic updates we bring to you every quarter. And just as a foreshadowing, with some of the underspent SHS funds from year 1, we are immediately executing a contract with Community Action to scale up eviction prevention resources based on the demonstrated practice we learned through the pandemic, leveraging capacity that was already in place through their workforce, and to help keep people from falling into homelessness. So I think what's heartening or hopeful I want to leave with you all is all of this work described and these goals described by the governor's executive orders all aligns perfectly with work already underway in Washington County. So we'll be able to quickly be responsive.
Okay, thank you.
And specifically to Wood Spring, I know it was referenced a couple times, I believe by the chair during the meeting. But the last update that staff had put on the Wood Spring page on our website was in January of this year. So we are putting active updates on the progress of the program, including on the webpage. It does include Wood Springs pilot programs anticipated timeline on that page. So just sharing that from an information point.
And that's on our website.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think what they were complaining was the lengthy of the process and the amount of the help. It's
Yep.
my understanding. The process was taking longer.
Yep, that timeline's listed on the website and we can provide another written follow-up on that.
That's, pilots are prone to do that.
I think, the staff, the housing. I just want to extend my gratitude to you all. You guys are seeing, like, you go out, your staff go out to encampments, and I've been there, and they take out all the questions that they answer. You guys are dealing with a lot. So I just want to express my gratitude to all you do, and if we ask hard questions, no offense or anything, I'm just grateful to all you do. So Tanya, your housing team and every team is excelling, but my work closely with you all, I'm very impressed. And I appreciate your compassion and kindness and the practical approach you present to housing.
If I may take a brief moment on Wood Spring, the subsidy is, we call it shallow subsidy, and we call it shallow subsidy for a reason. That was the amount we got from the legislature, and so we developed a plan to accommodate the resources we have. In terms of the delay, well, it's a government to government, so you have to have an intergovernmental agreement. And the State Department of Justice, I worked for the state housing for many years. They are, you can't push them around. They have to bless the intergovernmental agreement. So that caused significant delay. But we spend days, I've spent weekends over at Wood Spring. I've gone to their barbecue. We explain everything. Sometimes people have questions anyway.
Yes, and part of the administrative costs that they were referring to was the actual case
Case
manager
manager, yeah.
that the pilot program funding was for. So yes, exactly. So things sometimes are as bad as described and sometimes aren't.
Yeah.
And
The tenant said they could do a better job administering it directly. Well, it's government to government, and we went and fought for this on your behalf. So.
Which tells us that with the remaining 7 proposals of complexes that are moving towards their expiration of affordability, that this pilot teaches us something, and that's part of our landscape as well. So
That's correct.
keep up the good work. All right, well, let's go from one topic on homelessness and housing affordability to another one. Time, place, and manner, homeless overview.
Well, good afternoon again. Josh Kreitz, Assistant Director of the Housing Department. I think we have a presentation that we can.
We're getting it queued up for you.
Okay, so as they're queuing it up, I'm just gonna kind of tee it up a little bit. So this is a very, very meaty, complex topic. And it affects so many in our community. It affects our neighborhoods, it affects our businesses, it affects the unhoused individuals who are living in encampments. And so as we go into our presentation this afternoon, we look at the different strategies. Remember, this is, a West Coast issue. This is an Oregon issue, this is a metro issue. This is a national issue, and communities throughout the country are trying to figure out what is the best way to handle things like time, place, manner, ordinance. You can go to the next slide, please. As I tee this up around the agenda, I do want to let you know that
Josh, you're actually you've got control. You have the clicker.
as I move forward to agenda, We will, at the end of it, I will be coming back with Courtney, and then obviously we have staff here. We have policy questions for policy direction that will be teeing up. So this afternoon, we'll be going over the overview of the different strategies that are taking place right now and doing a lot of level setting on HB 3115, developing an ordinance, what that looks like, drafting recommendations, different policy considerations, a timeline around community engagement and ordinance development, and then again, back towards the end of this on board discussion and direction. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jess. I'm going to also invite Courtney to take my place at the table, and I will be back.
Thank you. Okay, again, for the record, Jess Larson, your Supportive Housing Services Program Manager in the Department of Housing Services. And so my job is to provide that context before we get into this potential or this future policy discussion. So we want to be clear that the policy discussion is not to manage for all that we need to do around addressing the issue of homelessness. It is specifically on the matter of enforcing the question of unsheltered homelessness. But we want to assure you that there is so much more being done, clearly, as we were previously discussing. And as you know, we are in the midst of building out a system of care, growing our homeless services response in Washington County from about $5 million a year to more than $75 million a year for at least the next 10, well, I think we're down to 9 years. And so this is going to have a significant impact on the shelter capacity. It's already had a significant impact on the shelter capacity. We're being able to offer those wraparound supports that help assertively engage individuals in working on housing plans and working towards resolving their homelessness. Of course, all of the housing programs, we have layers of housing programs. We have the permanent programs with wraparound supports to help people who need that long-term help to resolve chronic homelessness. We have the time-limited housing supports that help people who are working and getting back into work and will be able to take over their lease in the end, but need supports to stabilize their household in the meantime. And then, of course, we have those preventative efforts that can help prevent people from falling into homelessness. So it's a full menu of housing programs that we are actively scaling up significantly. And in addition to that, significant infrastructure investments in capital funding for shelter. We'll be talking about access centers later this year, additional hotel acquisition potentials to create permanent supportive housing on-site buildings that are designed to serve this population and more. So significant scaling up of our response to the emergency of homelessness. And then next, this is not my work, so I want to call out my colleagues from HHS and especially Tom and Deanna who are here, but this is really a coordinated county-wide effort, the Encampment Management Program, which you supported as a pilot project and really a creative way of responding during the pandemic to health guidance that we should not displace people during a pandemic. And so we needed a balanced approach to that public health guidance to help leave people in place during the health crisis, but also assess health and safety standards to reduce the impact on those both camping and the neighborhoods around. So it was designed with trauma-informed practices to provide consistent guidance to the people who were experiencing unsheltered homelessness, so they knew how to work within the framework of the Encampment Management Program. And it gives us as the county an objective tool to monitor and then abate the health hazards associated with camping. We want to be clear that the EMP program does not and has never authorized or sanctioned camping. It was a response tool to help us manage this public health guidance during a pandemic. It was temporarily funded through the summer, I believe, and will necessarily be updated and changed according to how the board directs the development of this time, place, manner policy. So we just want to reference that as a significant context, but it's not specifically what we're discussing here today. And then Next, we wanted to give you a quick view of that shelter system capacity, because then this is important context as well for the policy conversation, because so much of how we enforce time, place, manner has to do with the available option to shelter, having an alternative to camping by way of shelter. So this is the quick image of where we are at in building out our shelter capacity. You can see that before the funding from SHS, the vast majority of our shelter was only for the 4 months during winter. We had about 45 beds or so for families and youth only, no shelter capacity year round for individuals. The only option for someone who was unsheltered during the summer months and an individual or a couple was to hop on the Max and go downtown. That's significantly changed already. So we've expanded by 170 year-round shelter beds in Washington County, and our goal is to get to 250 at least. I think we're going to exceed that goal. And as we increase that permanent year-round capacity, we will decrease our reliance on winter-only shelter. So that's why you see that decreasing. But I can share with you from the team that right now we do have capacity to be responsive in an emergency. So we have, for example, 8 emergency beds at the Cloverleaf. So they're first come, first serve, and we partner with the law enforcement and outreach team. So if anybody is needing to get in, there's often an opportunity to get someone immediately in that night. They have to come back first come, first serve the next night, but there is that ability to be immediately responsive with our current shelter capacity. There were 46 of the 50 beds occupied on Friday at the Cloverleaf. Our shelter pods are currently full, but we have 5 more coming online probably in the next week. So we have 25 of those full right now. And down in Tigard in our Just Compassion shelter on Friday, we had 17 folks staying in the 20 available beds. So you can see with those E-beds and also just standard capacity, we have ability to be emergency responsive in an emergency. And this was demonstrated when staff had to work on closing the encampment at 197th a couple of weeks ago because of those emergency flood, or the flood that was creating an emergency rather. We were able to offer every individual there access to shelter that night. And I believe 4 individuals took us up on that offer and moved directly into shelter. But we wanted to have you give that capacity context for you to understand where we are at right now as a system. And with that, I believe I get to turn the mic over to Courtney to begin walking you through the policy questions.
Good afternoon, board. For the record, I'm Courtney Duke-Dreesen, Deputy County Counsel. I'm going to begin by going over a little bit of the legal background that has informed this work and led us to this place. And I'm aware that many of you are already aware of this, but we thought it was important to level set and for our listening audience who might not be as informed on this background. So a lot of this work generated, or a lot of this work started to come to light in 2019 when the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit issued a ruling in a case called Martin v. Boise. And that's the case where the Ninth Circuit said that the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, prohibits criminalizing the acts such as lying, sleeping, or sitting outdoors when the individual engaged in that conduct doesn't have alternative shelter. Essentially, you can't criminalize homelessness. It's important to note that decision also clearly stated that it's not a jurisdiction's obligation to provide housing for all its unhoused individuals in its jurisdiction, and also said that the holding was narrow and that using public property for this type of conduct can be regulated with reasonable time, place, manner regulations. A more recent decision out of the Ninth Circuit just in September of last year is a case called Johnson versus Grants Pass. This originated from an Oregon case, Oregon District Court in Grants Pass, that held and confirmed that sleeping in the context of Martin includes sleeping with rudimentary forms of protection against the elements. So in that case, the city of Grants Pass had said, if you're going to sleep outside on public property, you can't have a pillow, you can't have a blanket, you can't have a sleeping bag. And the Court of Appeals said that's unreasonable. Obviously, this introduces a fact scenario into the discussion because, what's protection against the elements is going to be different in LA County versus Washington County or, you know, Deschutes County. The Johnson decision also confirmed that civil citations are also prohibited under the 8th Amendment, where the civil citation is closely entwined with an eventual criminal violation. The easiest way to think of this is, you know, a civil penalty which goes unpaid, leading to a criminal penalty. And then I also want to mention here that Grants Pass, there is an effort underway to have this decision appealed to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declined to review the Martin v. Boise decision out of the Ninth Circuit, but the Supreme Court composition is much different now than it was in 2019. So there's a chance that there'll be more to come under the Johnson ruling. Finally, House Bill 3115, and that is the 2001 Oregon legislature bill that said that any law that a city or county has that regulates the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property that is open to the public must be must be objectively reasonable as to time, place, and manner to the person experiencing homelessness. So we're supposed to step into the shoes of the unhoused person and see if the regulations are reasonable. So as noted there on the slide, the House Bill 3115 compliance was delayed until July 2023, this coming summer, to give jurisdictions time to look at existing ordinances to see what they might already have on the books and get those things into compliance. But it's also sort of been, I would say, a date that a lot of jurisdictions have had in mind for creating a time, place, manner type of regulation. Yes, Chair.
I have a question related to that. If we were to put together an ordinance and do the work of adopting it, I'm assuming with this bullet that the ordinance needs to be effective by July 1st of 2023.
No, I think we could be, I think if we don't adopt something by July 1st, 2023, we're where we are now. Washington County doesn't have a county-wide anti-camping ordinance. So we could pass something after July. It's just whatever we pass after July has to be compliant with House Bill 3115. Arguably, we could pass something right now that wasn't in compliance. We wouldn't do that, but it's only the deadline for being in compliance with the House bill.
Okay, good. Thank you, because I wanted to make sure that that our work on this, that we could achieve the objectives that we would lay out for, but that we wouldn't have to backtrack. Okay, well, it takes 120 days for something to be in effect, so that pushes our calendar back and adds more time pressure. Thank you.
Good question.
I have a question.
Yes.
Courtney. Are there any cities in Washington County that have anti-camping laws that need to be?
I think there are some. That's a good question, Commissioner Fye. Early on in our coordination work with cities in Washington County, everyone shared what ordinance they had, and I did see some of those. I don't feel totally prepared to answer your question competently, but I could definitely get you that information. But there are a number of rules about using public property for sleeping outside, including some like parking type ordinances.
Okay, thank you.
So what are time, place, and manner regulations? This was a question Commissioner Treese brought up, which I thought was a good one. And I wanted to, again, level set on that. So time regulations are would be rules or laws that would regulate when sleeping or keeping warm on dry on public property could occur. There's two ways a time regulation could be implemented primarily. The first would be to say that, public property could only be used for this type of conduct during a certain period of the day. And that's what you see, what Astoria and Bend have proposed and adopted, limiting the use for sleeping to nighttime hours when most people are generally sleeping. It also could be used to designate a length of time that this type of conduct is allowed on public property. And that's what the city of Medford is proposing with allowing a camp or a person in a camp to stay in one location for 24 hours. Could also, these two types of components could also be used in conjunction with each other. A place regulation is a type of rule that would say where this type of conduct could occur. Most commonly, we've seen from other jurisdictions prohibiting this type of conduct on a type of property, such as parks or the public right of way, in sometimes an entire type zoning types of places like residential. Also within designated distances of waterways or other sensitive or protected areas. Conversely, we've also seen some jurisdictions adopting rules or regulations that allow this conduct on certain types of properties, such as the city of Corvallis that allows sleeping in parks and in front of their city plaza only. Notably there, they are also using a time regulation, so in conjunction with the place regulation. Finally, manner regulations, and this is rules or regulations that would say how the conduct can occur on public property. This is probably the one that's most familiar to your board, listening to us talk about the encampment management program. All those health and safety criteria that we've talked to you about before are manner type of regulations aimed at saying what's permissible and what isn't permissible while you're engaged in this conduct on public property. Any questions before I move on?
The only question I've always had, and I've been asked it several times, is what's public property? For instance, if you're a business, you're required to put in a sidewalk. That's by most ordinances. You're required to maintain that sidewalk. You have a business customers coming in and out, and if you have people camping and they do damage, or they're just, I guess, interfering with your business, is that a public right of way, or is that a private right of way?
Well, it depends on the it depends on, as you know, the state of Oregon owns their public right of way. They own it in fee.
How about Washington County?
Washington County does not own public right of way in fee. We just have a use easement, a type of use easement over that public property. So that would be a type of public area where camping would be subject to this type of regulation.
So your use easement is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And you don't get paid anything for the use, and the businesses don't pay you, you don't pay them. It's perpetuity. They have to maintain that easement. Do they have any rights or responsibilities in regards to that easement that you have?
Well, we're going to talk about public right-of-way, Commissioner Rogers, as we move forward. Obviously, when we're talking about public right-of-way, there's a lot of considerations, right? Right-of-way is an area that's designated for usually transport, either pedestrian or vehicle. So, that's something we have to consider. And we have those strong rights use because we don't want private owners interfering with the ability for people to travel from place to place. We also acknowledge that it's probably not the best place for people to sleep outdoors for those same reasons. We don't want to interfere with the primary use of that property. And then there's, of course, state laws about who takes care of sidewalks and local rules. So there's a lot of considerations.
Yeah, it's not the mobility issue. Nobody's concerned about that. It's picking up things off the sidewalk in front of their businesses, cleaning them, doing all of it.
Yeah.
So I was just curious about what.
It's a good question. It's complex. Yep.
Isn't mobility an issue? I've seen it come up with disabled people
Yes, well,
that,
sure.
okay.
That's
I'm just saying it's not that it isn't.
Yes, yeah.
Well, and it's a perfect segue to this next slide, which again, my last level setting slide where I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the goals that staff have been trying to keep front of mind as we engage in this work in a thoughtful way, and that we hope we all can keep in the front of our minds as we move forward through the discussion. So We believe some of the goals of our ordinance should be obviously to respect and protect the dignity of all people, not only those who are experiencing homelessness in our community, but also those in the surrounding house community and business community. We believe the ordinance needs to be transparent and enforceable. The more the more objectively specific we can be, it's going to be better for our staff, our law enforcement partners who are often going to be on the front lines of enforceability, as well as county staff or contractors who are going to be enforcing whatever policy decisions you all direct us to bring to you. And the transparency obviously is going to help buy-in or ensure buy-in, not only from our unhoused community and the advocates in this space, but also the surrounding community, so everyone understands what's allowed and what isn't going to be allowed. We believe, consistent with our public trust obligations, that the ordinance needs to account for the responsible maintenance and operation of publicly owned property. These are public resources, and we need to move forward in a way that, preserves these areas for all use, and is respectful of that obligation. And then finally, as to the right of way, it's very important that we preserve and maintain unimpaired access, not only for businesses and private property, but also to public property where the community is coming to conduct public business, to comply with with the Disabilities Act, and to ensure emergency ingress and egress in all locations. So finally, after listening to all that, I want to, this is kind of the meat of the presentation and where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So the next several slides, I'm going to talk about what we've seen as the best. We've looked at what our sister jurisdictions are doing all the way from LA to those in Oregon. And what we're bringing to you is sort of what we believe are the best practices that we've seen that are informed by our experience in managing encampments over the last year and a half. So what we would propose for your board's future discussion is an ordinance that is set up that would prohibit camping or sleeping outdoors on public property when shelter is available to the person in the camp or camping. So what's really important about that language obviously is the qualifying when shelter is available. So when shelter is not available to the person in the camping or sleeping outdoors, that part of the ordinance wouldn't be enforced, but we would enforce those reasonable time, place, manner regulations. And we believe this type of ordinance structure will bring us into compliance with the Ninth Circuit cases as they currently stand in House Bill 3115, and will account for that individual and community safety that we've talked about. So getting to the time, place, manner, actual policy decisions for your board. So first as to place, we believe and we've seen that it may be appropriate for your board to consider that there are some places where camping is just incompatible use with that type of property. These places could be on or within county buildings. In our minds, that would mean like the public service building areas where we have county employees staffed who are reporting to work and where the community is reasonably likely to show up to do public business. County parking lots and the public right of way, because these areas just there for vehicle traffic mostly, and it just creates a safety concern. Tax foreclosure properties is another area we'd like your board to consider because these properties are unique to the Washington County. They're the properties we get, or county governments, but they're the properties we receive when property owners don't pay their property taxes, and then they get deeded to the county after a long legal process. And we have a statutory obligation to keep those properties in good condition and return them to a public use or back to the tax rolls in private use as soon as possible. Then, of course, these are the places that become a little bit more fact specific, but any place that would impair emergency ingress or egress. And then another best practice thing we've seen is within prescribed distance of designated protected areas, such as wetlands or protected waterways. Also, we think it's important to consider prohibiting camping within certain distance of shelters or other places where houseless services are provided. And this one, I've heard it kind of described as a good neighbor agreement. When you cite these services helping the unhoused and the unsheltered, people show up. It's reasonable they show up. They know there's help available there, but it makes it difficult to cite these services when it then becomes an unregulated or unsanctioned camp. And then obviously a lot of jurisdictions are considering prohibiting camping within a prescribed distance from certain public service buildings such as schools or libraries.
I have a question.
Yes.
One of the most consistent feedback we've gotten at the county is the 197th encampment and also Shaw Street. And those are both in a residential area. Have you considered also recommending regulating and camping around residential areas? Because I think that's the folks that live in 197th and folks that live in I think this presentation was sort of like the end of the light tunnel for them. Back in many months ago, we would tell them, you know, hold on, the board is going to have time, place, and manner conversation. We're going to, you know, try to alleviate some of these negative impacts that you're having. And I know we're not going to talk about it, but also people are concerned or want to know how much the encampment costs have been and how much we invest. So I'm wondering, in your best practice research, have you looked into considering if we should regulate or perhaps restrict camping for residential areas in Washington County?
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Fye. We definitely see that quite a bit in ordinances proposed or adopted by cities. And obviously, you know, a city's zone, I'm not an expert in zoning, but, you know, the geography is quite a bit different and they may not have as many zoning categories as we have here in Washington County. So I think we did talk about it. I think we didn't. Again, this is a decision for your board to make.
Okay.
I definitely think it is within the realm of reasonableness to make that type of
recommendation.
Yes, and
the
regulation.
ordinance.
I think the flip side of making that kind of a regulation is then you have to see, well, what is left if shelter isn't available? Because one of the things, you know, the court talked about, the Ninth Circuit talked about in the Martin decision was in that case, or was that Grants Pass? It might've been Johnson. I think it was Johnson was the Grants Pass was making, they weren't really shy about, they were deliberately trying to push people onto county property and eliminate everything in the city. So, you know, part of that discussion is going to be if we eliminate residential areas, if there isn't a shelter available, is there other area available?
Right, like first addressing if they can't camp here, where can they camp? But also like the 197th residential areas and unincorporated areas of Washington County. And I think many of the people that verged off, I think might have come from, you know, their path to get to that area must have been through cities and whatnot to navigate to get to that 197th and baseline. And I think if many of the cities, if they do have conversations and they do come up there time, place, and manner, and we allow camping, I worry what happened in 197th and baseline could explode in unincorporated areas of Washington County. So those I'm bringing the lived experience of the people that have had negative impacts of 197 to here, and I think to this day we're hearing, and even I have a question about the right of way, but I'll wait. Wait. It's just a bit of a. I feel like I didn't want to distract you from where you're going, but I'll hold that off. But in this area, but I appreciate you saying that it's something that we could recommend.
Absolutely.
As well as provide an alternative. If they can't camp here, where can they go?
So we have at least 4 more slides dealing with just recommendations and considerations.
I'll try and speed up. I think I can go quickly through manner. the best practice would be for your boards that we'd bring to your board for consideration is to prohibit non-essentials and only allow for essentials. Of course, that requires, again, what does that really mean? But this wouldn't, we can't prohibit all things. People need things to live. But you know, some of the things that cause more concerns for the community is when the encampments become big and there's just a lot of things. So if you prohibit the accumulation of the unnecessary, non-essential things, you know, you can maybe address some of those challenges. We've seen a lot of jurisdictions restrict the size of the individual camps. Again, that's another way to try and prevent them from growing.
Could you just define for me what size means? Is that number of people? Is that?
It could be either, but literally the city of Bend has said you can't occupy more than 144 square feet while you're
Could be
engaged in this
or-
conduct.
Or actual geometry.
Yes, and then of course, assess for health. And then we would recommend we write in to a future ordinance, should your board decide to go that way, all those health and safety factors, you know, you can't accumulate waste, you can't leave waste, you can't use fire, you know, except for to cook, and no digging, trenching, those sorts of things. This is an area where I have to be candid that we don't really have a best practice recommendation for you. So we just want to lay out the pros and cons for you and let you know that almost every ordinance we've seen has had a time regulation, and it's that length of time, limiting the number of hours in a day that this conduct can occur. And we've heard from our city partners that they like this type of regulation and they want to adopt this type of regulation. And so we think it's important for your board to know that. I think it's because it's one of the most easily, you know, it's easy to understand time to time. It also is it's believed to be one of the most effective ways to limit the entrenchment of an encampment or camping. We have talked a lot about that. I think we want to be careful if we go forward, or we want to be realistic with your board that if you adopt a time of day regulation, because our community is so invested in this topic, we need to be ready and assess whether we have the resource to enforce that type of regulation, because we know we will get calls saying someone is still here. What are you going to come do?
Right.
Also, we want to acknowledge, going back to the dignity of all people, that it is a challenge for individuals who are already vulnerable to pick up and move all their things every, you know, at some just time period. And we are hopeful as more of these, the housing comes online, and with perhaps the right manner and place regulations, we can address some of the more difficult aspects of encampments through those types of regulations, and perhaps allowing people who are otherwise complying to stay put might be acceptable. So that's definitely a big discussion we're interested in hearing from your board about.
Gordon, can I ask a quick, I'll be quick, Chair Harrington. Just fact checking myself, the slides that, the presentation, Ben, they do time regulations and they do manner, but in place they have a designated area.
That was Corvallis.
Corvallis, okay, Corvallis. Okay.
So again, we've already talked about this. The basic structure would be that the no camping or sleeping outside on public property wouldn't be enforced when shelter is unavailable. We also want to build into, or we recommend your board consider building in suspension of enforcement when necessary, you know, in case of another national public health emergency or other national disaster. And then, notwithstanding the decisions in Martin v. Boise, it's very important that the ordinance have a violation procedure. We would recommend a civil infraction, which is a monetary procedure, but I mean, a penalty, but just wouldn't tie it to a future criminal to stay in compliance. We've heard from law enforcement that without a violation procedure, there's, you know, we might as well not do it. And then with that, I will turn it back to Jess.
Thank you, Courtney. So just a few finishing slides here to wrap it up and get you to your policy discussion. Clearly, there's much more work to do here. the staff bring an additional recommendation for further stakeholder engagement on many levels. We've already been coordinating, as Courtney was describing, with our city jurisdictional partners and somewhat with other departments, especially law enforcement. And we really need to begin engagement with service providers, people with lived experience, business owners, and community members. So we're recommending some robust engagement to continue this, to conduct the policy development in conjunction with community feedback and engagement. There's, as Courtney has laid out, there's many technical considerations, and we would want to convene our colleagues across the county, across departments, to continue to evaluate these technical considerations in conjunction with your direction and the stakeholder involvement and our jurisdictional partners around health and safety regulations, that balance of undue burden without benefit, the enforceability questions. And ultimately, what we've laid out today is sort of a menu of policy questions and options, but how they all come together in one coherent policy will really depend on your direction. So ultimately, staff have to take that direction and package it together with time, place, and manner policies that work together. So that's the engagement and the technical work we envision ahead for ourselves as your staff. So we anticipate launching that community work very quickly here, continuing that technical analysis, and then would recommend we work to bring you back a draft ordinance for your further direction and consideration in early March. And here's what that timeline might look like over the next 6 months, that engagement on many levels, that continued staff work, and then ultimately that draft recommendation leading into further community feedback and ultimately a public comment period before the board would take up a final action and vote. So I believe that's the end of our presentation. I'm going to turn it to Josh to ask the policy questions and be here for your discussion.
It's pretty heavy stuff. Before I ask the policy questions, I just want to make the board aware that Under Sheriff John Cook is here if there's any questions about enforcement issues. And also, just to show the relevancy, I believe the Beaverton City Council is actually taking this issue up this evening. So it's on everyone's mind. So as far as early direction for staff, our policy questions are: should staff continue with ordinance development process and prepare a draft for your board to review? Second, should the ordinance operate to exclude, discourage, or allow established encampments? And 3, what other questions or priorities does the board have for this policy development work?
I make the assumption that the Sheriff's Department, being a department of Washington County, and through additional service support, such as with our Hope deputies, that when you say that staff has gotten together on this, that they have provided input through all the conversations for the development of these ideas for us today.
Yes, Chair. Under Sheriff Cook and Lieutenant, I never get their ranks right.
I don't either.
Has been really involved in the encampment management work. And then we obviously also talk to them separately on sort of a leadership development, but they're very involved.
Yeah, great. So colleagues, this isn't just a conversation of providing input direction to our staff, but is also a conversation amongst ourselves to explore different thoughts and ideas and to learn from one another as we continue to navigate this space in service to our community. Who would like to kick us off?
Well, I'd like to ask a question, but I'd also like to reserve the right to have an opinion later too.
We'll definitely make sure everybody has
Just
2
kidding.
rounds.
Just
Don't
getting
worry.
my ground rules. Could you please go back to the recommendations around manner? believe that that's. And what? No, maybe it wasn't manor, place. I'm sorry, it's place, right there. So I believe what I heard you say was the recommendation was to regulate place in relationship to county buildings, county parking lots, because of the need for the public to do business there. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes,
And the issue that I just want to raise for thoughts and for discussion is that if I'm the owner of a business, I think I would react to that like, well, wait a minute, it's okay for you to do it because the public needs to interact with you, but that's also, I'm trying to serve the public as well. So by carving out the county as a special entity, that I think I'm worried that that would be offensive, frankly, to our business owners who are also in the same, they're doing the same type of thing, trying to serve their public. So I just bring that up for this table to consider as well. So that's the only point I want to make now. And now I'd like to listen to everybody else.
I'm happy to start first.
Sure.
I haven't come in with a set laundry list of yes on this, no on that, kind of thing. But I do know that there are certain areas that I want to ensure folks are no longer camping in. And it's specific to our natural resource areas, those vegetated corridors, particularly ones where the public sector has spent time and effort over decades with plantings, tendings, and some of these areas, I think about along Beaverton Creek, which just like the Tualatin River is very circuitous and runs through a number of communities. So we've seen with certain encampments that these areas, these soils are being compacted, limbs are being cut down, just harm. So I am interested in seeing us develop a policy or of an aspect of the policy that says, no, you can't. And it's not just restricted to the floodplain, but going from that waterway all the way to either a private property owner's boundary or the shoulder of a road. So I know that there's term of art with regard to right of way. Whether it's simpler when there's a sidewalk, right? Then you can go right up to the edge of the sidewalk, right? But there are some in some areas of the urban unincorporated Washington County, and I'm thinking of a couple of neighborhoods up in Commissioner Teresa's district where there are certain stormwater detention ponds that are not just a pile of rocks behind a fence, right? There's some vegetation there. And for quite a while with the newness of the neighborhoods, some neighbors were a little put off, like, well, why can't my kid just go explore that area? It's a little bit of nature. And I remember when I was a kid, but that's not the purpose of that area. So, when I certainly think about these natural resource areas, I want to make sure that there are certain triggering mechanisms, like does it include part of the ADA access for transport? Well, no, right? We don't want to keep people from being able to use a trail or use a sidewalk. I'm tired of people digging in these areas. That are in the public ownership. So I think we need to factor that into the policies. And you're closer to the legal language, and so maybe you already recognize how that's in there, and I don't. I do recognize that by adopting said policy, that we may have to recognize that we're going to have to find a place to purchase a parking lot or purchase a piece of land that has access. And we say, okay, for some period amount of time, we'll support, sanctioned camping, for lack of a better phrase, here, so as to keep you out of other places and until such time that we have, what's the term of art?
Available alternative shelter.
Yes, thank you. So those are just my early thoughts. I do concur with the situation that Commissioner Treese brought out, that we can't just say, no, not in residential zones, because then what does that leave us with, right? That leaves us with these waterways with vegetation that I'm concerned about. And that does leave us to areas that are zoned commercial, zoned neighborhood commercial, or others that I'm not remembering. So it may be useful for us to have some reminder maps of what certain zoning overlays are in these urban unincorporated areas. I also, through all of this, remind myself that this is a problem in rural areas too. And I've had multiple conversations with folks who live in rural Washington County who are tired of finding people on their property, or folks just walking onto their property and into their barns. And so that's where I'm hoping that will be clear as well.
If I might, I do, to address both Commissioner Treese and your last point there. I mean, we also need to remember that the Ninth Circuit and the House bill only relate to public property. Private property owners already have a private right of trespass and can trespass anyone off their property who is uninvited. So, the ordinance wouldn't include private businesses because they already have a way to regulate their property as to their private property. So.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. There are folks who wonder about, okay, when there's an overpass over Highway 26, that's where things raise, as you talked about, the state right of way. But as there is a county road leading up to an area, then they're wondering about, well, so does that just mean they can be over on this side of the highway? So it's some of those area nuances that I'm not sure about. And so just trying to better understand the lay of the land, so to speak.
Noted, and it's a real challenge and one we're trying to address with coordination with our partners, and a issue we have dealt with repeatedly since 2020. There was that encampment on TV Highway very close to the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
And we thought it was really something that needed to be addressed, but it wasn't Washington County property. And so we were working with the state, so
Yeah.
it's
It's complicated.
We've talked about it a lot. We know everyone's going to have different needs. Jurisdictions are going to have different needs, but there needs to be some coordination, because exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Nobody knows exactly where the state right of way ends and the county right of way begins. And, it requires all of us being aware of what we're doing.
I'll just bring up too for your consideration. I think Jess mentioned it at the top. We have staff and their primary focus is just finding spaces, parking lots,
Yep.
plots of land to do different types of alternative sheltering that we can open up more options. So we have staff who are actively working several different things right now. And that's all they do is they're working on getting more options for us. So that is something that is already moving forward.
And to your policy question, should the ordinance operate to exclude, discourage, or allow established encampments? So in a way, my answer is yes. Because, I am concerned about individuals that are trying to hold down jobs. They're just having difficulty for whatever reason to land with housing. And, they don't always have a car. So where are they going to leave their materials during the course of the day? But at the same time, I don't want people to think that, oh, well, we can just do this because we want to and go on and on and on. We're investing a lot of resources to try and ensure that people do have the case management, the supportive services, and they can't just keep saying no, 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 no. When we know that there's impact to adjacent neighborhoods and people who are trying to go about living their lives. I have thought, and I don't mean to take up all the airtime here, folks. I have thought about the time that the time aspect. You talked about on that slide 14, the number of hours in a day. Well, I thought about, okay, well, what if someone does have a job and they're unhoused, but they haven't yet landed in that rental unit? There are weekend days, there are off of work days or illness days. I mean, if somebody's too ill to report to work and they're unhoused, what are we going to do? So that part isn't clear to me yet. And I'm hoping as we continue to go through the development of this and consideration that I may be able to get my mind clear about what we're saying is going to happen for certain parts of our community membership. I think that's all I've got for now, folks. How can I learn from you?
Well, I'll jump right in. I think this is really good topic. And I'm wondering immediate request could be like, is there a way the staff could put together like a FAQ that we can share with our constituents about this particular conversation that we're having? That, that's just something that would be really helpful. And in terms of your questions here,
Commissioner, if I can, before you keep going, can I just respond to that request? I think the purpose of today was really getting board policy direction. And then I can't remember on which slide, but the team did reference to community engagement. So I think that FAQ kind of format would be helpful. We'd have, as we go through community engagement, have those opportunities outlined on our website and resources as well. But really, this is the first stop before we get to those FAQ.
Yeah, no, we have to answer the question today. Do we want staff to develop time, place, and manner? And I've given an example of a place that I'm concerned about, that I want to see that camping excluded there.
I agree with you, Tanya. I think it definitely will be coming out of the community engagement process and something, but like even this slide, we'll definitely share with the constituents, but even just like, what is the time, place, manner conversation, like how you laid it out for us to, like, what are the options? That way their constituents can engage us and say, actually, one of the options that your staff suggested is a better idea is what I think, but if it's too much work, we can wait to community engagement in the meantime. I think for me, in terms of, I think I'm with the chair on this. I think we need to have a designation. I think I am very sensitive and really want us to figure out a way to not allow encampments in neighborhoods, areas, and learn from the impact that it had, 197th and Shaw Street, the impact it had on our residents and the surrounding communities and businesses, because there's not just residents, businesses have also been impacted. But I also believe, that we can't tell people that don't have houses to go home, so we have to figure out a way to provide people on options to where they can, law by law, where they can camp. If we are telling them no here, where is a yes for them to go? And then the other thing I was thinking of in terms of, the second questions, exclude and exclude. I think one exclusion could be like residential areas. And I don't know what parameters and what density concentrations of housing that we use, but I would like our ordinance to really learn and use the lessons learned from those active encampments, that the residents and the impact that it had on them. And then I had questions about, I wrote down, these are prepared questions besides. One of the questions I had, and I think the chair alluded to, is that how will we handle personal properties recovered from removed encampments? I think that's the one question I had. The other question, I know Under Sheriff Cook is sitting in the back over there. I won't, but I'll just throw it out there as violations and enforcements. I have a lot of, I think it would be helpful if you come back. I know one of the recommendation was civil infractions. I think it would be helpful if we had a menu of options to choose from, because civil infractions, from my understanding, the little homework I did looking up, is a fine, but we're talking about people who are houseless. How would they pay, and what's the enforcement ability built into that, and how would we enforce? And I'll just outright say, I don't think we should criminalize. And I think that's not something I should say. You all believe in that. I think I've heard it, your compassion and kindness to homeless people and the practical approach you're presenting here today. But I just wanted to put it out there that I think we need to foresee unintended consequences of potentially criminalizing homeless people. And then the other one, I think Courtney and Josh and Jess, it came out the meeting, the briefing I had, I think it's something you mentioned, was around vehicles for camping. Where and how, where and when how do they fit into this ordinance? Is a question I had on too. So I think those are for now, and then I had small questions for Josh, but I'll connect with, not Josh, Jess, about the number of beds and whatnot. But the other thing, the reason why I say designate area, I think it's really the humane thing to do, and Josh, is, there, as you know, and I've heard from you all, especially the housing experts, that there will be people in Washington County that are homeless that will never be in shelter. So where do they go? And what is our level of responsibility as an elected to set policy directions to help people, to guide them to be, so those are my thoughts.
So I can address two of your questions today. The first was, what do we do with property collected at encampments? Your board in June, you may remember we came to you with the homeless camp removal policy, and that is a policy that's required by state law that is actually exempted from House Bill 3115. The House Bill 3115 says policies like our homeless camping and policy are not laws subject to 3115. And that section of the Oregon law does dictate what we do with property that we collect. And I don't have it dialed in completely, but essentially we give 72 hours notice when we remove a camp,
Yeah, I
when we
noticed that on Ben.
which is what we did with 197th when that emergency flooding arose. And then we collect property that has apparent value. We're not required to collect anything that's, soiled or unsanitary or dangerous or evidence of a crime, or part of a crime. And we label it and we store it for 30 days and we let, we provide notice of where it is and how it can be collected. Or is it more than 30 days now? Actually, I can't remember. The law may have extended it to 60 days. I can't recall exactly, but we do have a process for that. The other question, cars. We do, Washington County does currently have an ordinance I think it's under the towing ordinance that prohibits living in a car in the public right of way. And then there's also a provision about living in an RV for 5 days in one location for 5 days for a 2-week period. So those laws would be looked at for objective reasonableness under 3115.
I'll just comment briefly on the other question. So I think the housing staff is just trying to build out a plethora of housing options, alternative shelters, permanent shelters, and trying to find stuff that will work for everyone over the course of time. And with that said, there will be individuals who will choose not to go into those housing options. And that's where our outreach and engagement efforts will continue to build those apparatuses to get out there and to work with those individuals. People become homeless for a lot of different reasons that are so complex, and some of it's trust. And when your trust has been broken so many times by so many systems, it takes a lot of time to reestablish that trust. And that's what we're asking our outreach teams to do, is get out there, reestablish trust. And that can be a process of months or years, and engage them to say, come back in, like, trust us, let us help you get housed. And sometimes that just takes time, but that's what we're trying to do, is build out that capacity and all the different housing options. So when they do trust us, they have a place to come home to.
Any other commissioner thoughts on whether or not you want staff to work on such a ordinance development? And then what sort of parameters are you thinking of? Any additional parameters?
Well, there's just obviously a lot to this. The answer is yes, I do want staff to continue with the ordinance development. How all that works, I've had conversations with Nafisa, and I had a conversation yesterday about this. Trying to find a happy spot for all of this is extremely difficult. It bothers me that we are trying to provide, even in the camps, we're trying to provide porta potties and other, attributes to make it reasonable. And we find that they continue to destroy property. They continue to go into neighborhoods and disrupt neighborhoods. It's kind of mind-boggling to me, the fact that we have decriminalized. I can understand decriminalizing homelessness, but I can't understand decriminalizing theft, malicious behavior, those kinds of things. And we seem to, even if we have the ability to do that, we don't. And probably because we don't have jail space to do that either. So it's a difficult situation we find ourselves in, and there's just a myriad of things that I guess I'll be looking for, and I certainly don't relish the thought of having to draft this ordinance. But yeah, let's go ahead. I think we've covered a lot of territory here. I think you have a sense of what we will accept and what we won't, I hope anyway. But the conversation will continue. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I've written a lot of notes and I'll just wait till I see the draft.
Not one of the most, but one of the very difficult issues we deal with. I don't necessarily agree with the district decision, ninth district, but so what? That's not my call, it's theirs. So we're having to deal with it. As far as continuing on, I agree to that, but that's not an issue. To me, there are some places that I would never say that camping is permissible. One was already mentioned, and that is around any of our sensitive areas such as basins, the retention basins for storm runoff. They're in every neighborhood. These are designed not to have people trample on them. It's important that they don't. And so I would prohibit that. And Clean Water Service, I can't remember what the number was, a couple of 300 of these things throughout the county at least. So I would never do that on sensitive areas that you have streams and other things through. I don't like that. I don't like them around schools, much like we did with the marijuana ordinance when we did that. I don't think it should be permissible. Residential, I don't know what a residential neighborhood is anymore. And where I come from in my neck of the county, we have mixed use communities where you have commercial sitting right next to residential. We might call them multi-use, but it's multi-use, not residential. It is. And so it's hard to do a particular area. My only solution is mine, is we're going to have to develop some sites that we make available and ban it everywhere else. Because if you don't do that, you can't go out and find people. They don't have money to begin with. I mean, you can't sit there and arrest everybody. Jerry pointed out, jail's not big enough. I mean, it doesn't work. I have some long-term concerns, and that is in regard to the cities. If you don't develop some policies that fairly well follow their standards as well, where are these sites that we're going to find, unless I guess we make unincorporated, which the only big parts would be Aloha and some other areas where we have big sites. Where are we going to buy all of these things? And then what if the city has a different idea? We need a lot of coordination, I would think, between the county and the city. It sounds like we're doing a lot of silos looking, everybody's trying to do something different. And that's a shame. I mean, we all have the same problem. We just need to figure out how to collectively deal with it. I don't envy somebody on that side of the table. I don't know who it was. There isn't a happy spot. You're going to end up with nobody liking any of this. Yeah, and no solutions, no matter how hard you work. And I guess if we all ran away to Cleveland, maybe we wouldn't. We wouldn't have it. I'm just teasing.
I don't think he is.
You took a dig at you, Josh. What you can say?
Nice one.
He's one. Each other all the time.
It took clear an hour to
Yeah,
get to that.
yeah.
He held back as long as he could.
You've got some hurt feelings.
That's some hurt feeling. That's okay.
He said last week it was a big hit. There you go.
But you just can't come up with a good solution. So I think you keep working at it. I agree, but just to summarize quickly, there are certain areas that we shouldn't allow. I mean, you want to know that, and I named a couple. I think there's, as far as the time, I think that's good. I don't think you force just say residential no, but everybody else yes. Businesses, to Pam's point, will be hurt about that because in certain areas you're abutting your buildings almost. They're right up to the sidewalk, and then they have a strip, a planter strip, and they're saying we didn't want to give the government any of that. Not only did we have to give it to the government, we had to sit there and maintain it and plant certain things. So we're not happy about that to begin with, and to have people there at all hours is problematic. I also am concerned about bus stops, and that's just not bus stops for TriMet, but for school kids. There are areas that sometimes are protected and sometimes shelters not. I don't think it's fair to have people camping in those kinds of facilities when kids are trying to catch the bus out there, some 5, 6, 7-year-old kids sitting there saying, I don't have any place to stand. So I don't like that as well. So it wouldn't just be adjacent to school. But please, and maybe, I know you are, I work with the cities. I hope as this area becomes all, inside cities, these unincorporated urban areas. You're gonna find you're gonna have to work with them in the rural, and it's the last thing I'll say, in the rural areas, I've heard the same things. I represent quite a bit of rural areas. I know Jerry does most of it, but it is a problem out there, and people are not happy about people trespassing, and I understand that you have private rights, but people don't know where to go, so we don't have sites that they can go to, so they say, well, go out in the woods someplace. There isn't any free woods. I mean, somebody owns those woods. So we've got to figure out those sites. So yeah, I think that we ought to buckle up and say we're going to buy, I don't know, parking lots, buy access to parking lots, buy usage, but that's, to me, the only solution. So that's my.
Can I ask one quick question I forgot to ask? Do we know what our homeless number is? Because you say you have 277 year-round beds, so what's our bogey?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the best information is like our point in time information. I don't have that off the top of my head, but we can obviously.
We just did that in January. They're doing that.
They're going to be doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, but the point in time we know is
Usually under count.
woefully, under count. So, okay.
I'd just like to react. Thank you for answering my question earlier. And I do support the continuation of the ordinance development. And I think what I'm encouraged about is around the table, I've heard from the commissioners, from staff, that we want to be sympathetic, empathetic as we move forward. But we have to consider all facets of the environment and our public as we move forward. And that's, to me, that's the essential part.
So I think we've, from the sounds of it, gone a step further and described areas that we're concerned about, where we would like to exclude camping, but also how it's likely we'll need to look at some additional provisions as well for our community. So it may be a multi-step effort of some narrowing before you go through the full public engagement. So I think we've, I don't want to say we've reduced the number of things on the table. We've tried to provide some clarity. So it isn't wide open, but I'm not sure that we have given you enough narrowing. I'll refer to it as that in order for there to be that real meaningful public engagement that you might like. So feel free to review that with the team. Feel free to enumerate the collection of direction you've given here for us to weigh in and say yes, no, or otherwise, so that you feel that you have enough direction from the board to make highest and best use of the constrained staff time. On the public engagement, the only concern I had on the timeline that you provided is we do know that the month of May is very heavy for us with both the CWS Budget Committee meeting and the Washington County Budget Committee meetings, and trying to make sure that we are inviting public input then. So I just want to make sure that we're not overloading the month of May too much. That's all.
It looks like your policy development process that you've got up there, though, does look pretty consistent. We're going to get a draft proposal back in March after you've had a lot of meetings with the community and cities. So that'll be another
Well,
snapshot.
but what I'm concerned about is that people are saying, well, that wasn't specific enough. That there may be some folks saying, well, what we really want is to better understand what that draft proposal is in the April timeframe. And, leading into that May public comment. That's what I was just wondering about. That's all.
So I would suggest our team reconvene, given the feedback from the board today, and relook at this this timeline. This was good, and I want to underscore the January point in time. Board of Commissioners, this was your first conversation, so initial feedback. So we'll take that feedback, look at our timeline and how to continue to have a realistic timeline. What I've heard themes of in ensuring that there is partner collaboration. Commissioner Rogers, I want to share, I don't feel like we're working in a silo here. I think we are working collaboratively, but continue to do that work. In addition, one of the information needs that I heard was really maps and having a map exercise, to really look at urban, unincorporated and rural Washington County and that zoning. So we can do a bit of work on this timeline and then email you an updated timeline with a bit more clarity in those board touch points as well.
When you do those maps, do you take into consideration information from the deputies as well? I mean, is it I would guess that the information is pretty broad.
Yes, so this presentation is a really good example of a one Washington County approach. While we have county council and housing sitting here, there's multiple departments that are involved in this. So yes.
We're just asking for standard maps, not some new map.
Correct.
What is today?
And this is a map, are we, I want to make sure I'm on the same page here. Is it the map of current encampments and what are we talking, then I'm
We
sorry.
already
I'm
have
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is a request for understanding commercial, industrial areas,
Zoning.
residential
Yeah, okay,
areas,
sorry.
sensitive areas, protected areas, public property. So we need to work with the team and see what we have available.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, we're calling it done for that topic for the time being. We're going to take a 15-minute break and then convene at 20 minutes past 3 to pick up with the transportation system overview topic.
The whole room leaves. What's going on? What's going on?
I don't want to be taking any cookies home. Please eat them. They're
Where
in
are
the
they?
back of the room. There's napkins back there too.
I ate another one. I'm taking them further than home.
Have you,
And
you've had
Right.
three?
Commissioners, we are back and ready for the last topic.
Terrific. Welcome back to our work session.
Checking.
And we have one more formal topic on our work session agenda. It's a transportation system overview. Take it away, Mr. Roberts.
Oops. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I know you're behind schedule a little bit, so I'll do my part to try to help you wrap it up.
All about learning and discussing.
Exactly. Well, thank you for your time. And I did want to just give you what will be a very high level overview, just really about the transportation system in Washington County and how we plan for it, how we pay for it, how we build it, essentially, just, and again, very high level. And really the purpose today, I have the clicker here. So really our purpose today is to just sort of set the stage for some future conversations that we'll have with you in the coming couple months about capital improvement plan development, which again is our first foray into this effort this year. And then we'll be continuing with MSTIP discussions moving forward. And then I think there's just like so many other things, there are just more needs than there are available revenues. And so probably setting the stage then for some discussions about other revenue opportunities for transportation. So again, today's briefing is really informational, but obviously be sure to let us know if you have any questions that we can either answer here or follow up on about sort of the transportation system, how we fund it, how we build it, and that sort of thing. So what do we mean when we say the transportation system? Well, the context might vary a little bit, but I think writ large, the transportation system here in Washington County really includes a system of highways, streets, and trails, and those are managed by not just the county, but our city partners. We have special districts, TriMet, or Walton Hills Park and Rec District manages many of the trails in the urban unincorporated area, and then our city partners as well. So there's the hard infrastructure, those elements, and then there are also transportation services. So in particular, I'm thinking about transit. Our transit providers, obviously, are TriMet in most of the county, and then in the Wilsonville area, the South Metro area, Rapid Transit Agency, and then we, the county, are also a service transit service provider, and that we provide funding and contract with Ride Connection to help provide some of the last mile connector and shuttle services that that are operated here in the county. And those help both fund rural connections, but also some last mile type connections within the TriMet and Smart Service districts. And that's work actually we're quite excited about being able to participate in. It's a very good effort. And then why is the system important? So just stepping back and thinking about the context. And so really it connects all the places that we need to go, where we live, work, and play. It provides, if we're doing our job well, it will help provide travel options and then provide equitable access to folks to their important destinations. It helps support economic opportunity in the county. And then again, just helps us to keep up with growth in the county. We have been and probably will continue to be a growing county. And so we just do need to help folks be able to get around. And safely is one of our objectives too, helping folks get where they need to go and to do it safely. So then to focus a little bit more on the county managed parts of the transportation system, and this is infrastructure specifically. So we do manage over 1,300 miles of streets and roads that are under county jurisdiction. That includes 203 miles of arterial roads. Those are our biggest and busiest roads, things like Murray Road, Shoals Ferry Road, Cornelius Pass Road. We also operate about 258 miles of collectors. That's kind of the next tier of roadways, and over 840 miles of what we call local and neighborhood route streets. So streets that just serve local access functions. And within that, about 687 of that 1,300 miles of roadways is in the urban area. So just a little over half. We also maintain about 183 bridges, or 183 of those 82 have some sort of either functional or structural obsolescence or past their design life. So we obviously have some ongoing bridge maintenance and eventually replacement needs that we're being mindful of. And then over 3,000 drainage culverts that convey water under roadways too. So the roles that the county plays in implementing the transportation system. So we plan for the countywide system. We help to build and improve elements of the countywide system, the infrastructure. Again, we operate and maintain existing county streets and roads. And then there are some of those roadways are within city limits, but function as a part of a countywide road system. And then again, as I mentioned, we provide some of those transit services, connector and last mile services. And we do all of that work in collaboration and coordination with our state, metro, city, special district partners, and with developers in some cases. And then community engagement, of course, is always an important element of all of our work.
Just to pick up on a point, in these two slides, this one and the one previous, you talk about streets and roads, streets and roads. Is there a term of art difference?
No, I mean, functionally, the state would classify all public roads as roads, highways, actually, I think is even the term that's used in state statute. So streets, we use that term because it tends to imply something more than just a roadway. So a street we think of as having both the travel path for vehicles, but also probably bike elements and sidewalk elements, street lighting, those urban kinds of amenities that come with. And roads might be thought of in a more sort of rural type context, probably just a roadway.
Yeah, and some roads could be just gravel versus
right.
paved too.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't put the statistic in one of the slides, but we do actually manage over 200 miles of gravel roadways as a part of our rural road system. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
Commissioner Fye, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Herndon. Stephen, I had a question about the operate and maintain existing county streets and roads bullet points. Under there, it says most streets in unincorporated Washington County, and then parentheses. I'm wondering if you could tell me private streets, known private streets.
Okay, yeah. So in some cases, we actually have developments, and mostly residential developments, where a developer needs to provide a paved access way to certain properties. And in the county development standards, we actually stipulate that many of those roads, because they're very short and serve for access to a limited number of properties, we actually push to make those streets private so that they are actually owned and maintained by the benefiting property owners.
Yeah, we
as opposed to the public.
Our HOA has used to be this, well, Street of Dreams, it's gated community. They own the streets, sidewalks and everything, and we're required to have a $20,000 savings account to maintain those.
They're all over the place.
Yeah, it's an interesting statistic. I'd have to check with our team to see if we can get a number of what the mileage of private streets is. I don't even know that we keep an accurate inventory because we don't
You don't have
manage them.
responsibility for them.
Right. Yeah, and I lived in a neighborhood that had a private street. It had been a mobile home park, I think, at one time, and the streets were repurposed and maybe weren't constructed quite to the public standard, and so they were actually just managed as private roadways.
A lot of them are stub streets.
Right.
Just go to one to a handful of houses.
Okay, so not an arterial road.
Correct. Right. Yeah, it's a great question.
I had no idea these.
I know. See, so
Never lived.
I'm touching the surface. We have lots of time for more conversation.
Come down to my hood, I'll show you the wetlands too.
Oh.
We own that too.
Okay.
Not something we own.
Okay, and then I just wanted to talk just a little bit about how our department is structured and how we do this work. And I have several of our division manager team in the back here. So we have the Planning and Development Services Division, that's Aaron's team. They're responsible for transportation system planning, planning studies, and helping us with our funding discussions, and then providing support when we do apply for grants. We have Capital Project Services, Joe Yonkins, who's our recently retired, but still helping us out.
He did.
Division manager.
Retired.
I don't know if he got the memo.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Don't get it to him.
Guess who's back? Guess who's back?
Right. No, he's agreed to stick around and help us continue moving forward with some important work. So, but they're the team that does the design and delivery of most of our transportation projects. Administrative services, that's Sheila Giambrone and her team really manage our budget and our financial and business support for the department. And then we actually house our transit service administration function there. So Chris Steffenbach actually does quite a bit of work on that. And then we have some other folks that provide some support there too. Our engineering, traffic and survey team, Stacy Shetler is our county engineer, and he also manages that division as well. So they maintain sort of the traffic signals, do work on traffic studies and analysis, and does a lot of work with developers that are actually building parts of the county road network, making sure that they do it to the county's standards. And then lastly, the operations and maintenance team. And so I think you hear that referred to as O&M, and that is a very important element of the transportation system. The costs to operate and maintain are continuing to grow, just like the cost of constructing new infrastructure. So we just need to ensure that we're always planning ahead and ensuring that we have adequate resources to just maintain the system that we have. And Todd Watkins is our division manager for that team. So a little bit about the transportation system plan. So really it establishes the policies for how we plan, build, and operate our system, identifies general locations of roadways, their functions. So that's where we talk about things like an arterial or a collector roadway. And then in most cases, the number of lanes that are ultimately planned for a particular roadway. It also identifies things like freight routes, bikeways, trails, and some of our major transit corridors. And in the transportation system plan, we're always trying to think 20 years ahead and forecast what our needs are going to be in 20 years, looking at our population and employment growth forecasts, and then identifying solutions to try to achieve the mobility that we anticipate being needed in that work. The TSP is an important part of our comprehensive plan, and it's helping to implement our state and regional requirements, as well as some of our own county requirements in our comprehensive framework plan. And we also try to keep it coordinated and consistent with city and regional plans. And so you'll see every now and then we're coming back through with amendments to the ordinance for consistency with some of our local partners as they take on different planning efforts. And inevitably, we're always just a little out of sync, but we work hard on trying to keep them as closely linked as we can. And I mentioned earlier the capital improvement plan. So this is really our first foray into developing a countywide capital improvement plan, and transportation is obviously a key component in that, along with facilities and information technology. And I know I'm missing another one, but anyway. So again, this is a tool for helping to implement the county plans, including the transportation system plan. And it's really a tool for prioritizing our community needs and even our internal organizational needs in some cases over a 5-year period. And again, it's about matching those needs with the available funding sources and revenues. And again, the purpose of it is to just help align us with community and organization goals. And we'll be back in March to speak a little bit more about the capital improvement plan process.
Is that a mini promotion of roundabouts picture?
No, it just happened to be a photo that fit the slide. So, and that's our Kruger Elbert Road roundabout in Sherwood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm going to try to move relatively quickly through these. We just wanted to sort of make sure that everybody had a good picture of what the different funding sources are and a little bit about how they're used and some of the restrictions maybe around those. So this is sort of an overall picture, and our total revenues for the last fiscal year for transportation were just over $100 million. And you see the breakdown there, and I'll just be clicking through and talking a little bit more about these as we go. And I'll note it on the right half of the pie chart, essentially, you'll see that there's a light gray box around that half of the chart. And those different funding sources there, those three funding sources really constitute what we refer to as the county road fund. And that funding is primarily dedicated to operations and maintenance. And then the remaining funds tends to be more geared toward either capital investment or in some cases, some maintenance, including urban road maintenance district. But I'll highlight a few of those. So as I mentioned, about half of our total revenues is goes into the county road fund. And that primarily, again, goes to operations and maintenance, but does some capital improvement. We've funded sidewalk projects. We're doing a significant number of accessibility upgrades on our system with those funds. And the funding sources are, we receive a share of the state gas taxes and fees that are collected, and those are driver license fees and things like that. We have
how's that allocated? I mean, the gas
I
taxes,
think I have another slide. I'll come back and
okay.
touch on that briefly.
Yeah.
And this funding really is limited constitutionally in the Oregon Constitution to being utilized in public road rights of way. And so we do have some limitations on how we spend that funding. And it, as I mentioned, just primarily supports our operations and maintenance.
I have a question, Stephen, on previous slide, many years ago, I made a funding circle for myself of where all the transportation. And I didn't notice it, but it's in my notes here, service district for lighting. Isn't listed there, but where does?
Yeah, I think that,
small of a fraction.
yeah, that's,
Yeah.
yes, that's a good point. I'm not sure that we specifically called that one out in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
But isn't that just for lighting? That's not
Yeah,
for-
it's just for lighting.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be
It's not for transportation.
I was gonna say, yeah, couldn't use it for transportation.
But you couldn't use it for transportation?
Correct.
Right.
Just
It
for
really
lighting.
just pays for the street lighting service in the urban unincorporated areas.
So it's.
So it sort of
It
falls
Sort of
under
transfer.
operations and maintenance.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't get to there,
Yeah. No, that's a good
but
point.
it's the street light.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Not the directional lights.
No, it's street, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Illuminating.
Okay, great. Okay, moving on. Okay, so the state highway gas taxes and fees. And so again, I mentioned that is state gas tax, currently 38 cents per gallon. For large trucks, they're assessed what's called a weight mile tax or fee, and that's based on the weight of the loads that they're carrying as well as the number of miles they drive. It's a fairly complicated formula, but it's intended to help ensure that the freight industry is helping to pay for the wear and tear that they put on the road system. There's state vehicle registration fees and then driver license fees. And to your point, Commissioner Willie, your question about how that funding is allocated. So there's generally, it's not precise, but generally there's what's called a 50-30-20 split of those funds. So 50% goes to ODOT for the state system, 30% is distributed to the counties. And the proportional distribution is based on the number of vehicle registrations in each county. And then the 20% goes to cities, and it's distributed proportionally to cities based on their population.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So fairly complicated formula. So one thing, as we're obviously looking ahead and knowing that this helps to fund our operations and maintenance, as we look forward, ODOT is forecasting that without some changes, probably from the legislature, they do anticipate that state highway fund revenues will start to flatten and eventually decrease over time. So that's definitely something that's on their minds and ours.
And that's EV use.
Not exclusively. EVs, they are charging higher vehicle registration fees to try to help offset, the fact that they'll be paying little or no gas tax over the life of the vehicle.
Right.
So they're taking steps to try to measure
balance
that.
that.
Yeah, and I think the longer term strategy too is that certainly there's been a lot of discussion at the state level, and a pilot program has been going on for several years now, using a vehicle miles traveled system. And so I think over time, we're going to see the state formally move away from the gas tax system and
So
more
what is
toward
causing the flattening?
well, I think it's just a combination of people driving less overall. So in some ways, we're achieving some of our bigger objectives of trying to get people to drive less and increasing fuel efficiency. Mhm.
So I paid a privilege tax to buy my electric vehicle. Where's that privilege tax?
That is an excellent question.
Yeah, tell them to give it to the transportation fund.
All right.
Don't you get a rebate though?
Federal, not from state.
I
don't
thought it
know
was
if I-
combined
It's pretty
15.
small, that state one.
And back to transportation funding.
Indeed.
Want my privilege tax paid to transportation.
You could also say hence why we're tolling. Because of this.
Well, yeah,
Highway
that,
trust fund,
yeah, that's
one of the things that's being called out. One of the reasoning.
right, right. And a lot of that I think is probably going to be earmarked for new construction, but operations and maintenance continues to be an ongoing challenge for ODOT for sure.
Yeah, and the gas taxes haven't increased since 1993 is what I heard.
Well, the federal gas tax
Ah.
hasn't, but the state gas taxes have been increasing over time. House Bill 2017 included a phased set of increases, and I think a 2-cent increase, the last 2-cent increase, I think just took effect in January.
Yeah.
And then the county has its own vehicle registration fees. So the board adopted this, I believe, in 2016, and it took effect beginning in 2018. And at the time, the board assessed the fee at $30 per year. So it's for most cars, your renewal happens on a 2-year basis. So it's typically $60 at your 2-year renewal period. And the funds are split between the county and the cities. So the county receives 60% of the revenue that's collected and the cities get 40%. And that's again distributed based on their relative population. And I would note here that the state rules now, I believe, currently allow for a maximum of $63 for an annual fee. So the statutory limit on the county vehicle registration fees is that it can't exceed the state. And 63 is there
63 annually,
annually, correct?
right? And we're at 30 annually.
Correct, correct.
Is there a requirement the split to just be on roads improvements or is there no discretion?
Yeah, these funds fall under that constitutional limitation about being used in county or in road right of way.
Road right away.
Yeah.
No sidewalks or.
No, you can use
You could use
sidewalks
sidewalks?
just within the roadway right of way. So for instance, we couldn't go outside the road right of way to build trails or things like that with those funds, but we do use it for things like sidewalks and accessibility improvements, things like that. Yeah. And when we adopted that fee, one of the key needs that we'd identified at the time was really dealing with drainage culverts. That was really a focus. We'd actually had a recent, at the time, a recent culvert failure on Timber Road that had happened just after a school bus had passed over, and we were pretty fortunate there, but we have invested a significant amount of that funding in doing culvert replacements where we think we may have risks in the system. So we also have a county gas tax. It's 1 cent per gallon. It applies across the county. So any fuel station in the county collects that 1 cent tax. Those revenues are split also between the county and the cities, but the ratio is flipped. So 40% goes to the county, 60% goes to the cities, I should say. And then there are, in addition, 3 cities within the county that have instituted additional city gas taxes for fueling stations within their city limits. So Cornelius, North Plains, and Tigard each have a city gas tax.
That option isn't available anymore, is it? That window closed?
I don't know. It does require voter approval, but I think it's still a possibility.
Okay.
And so moving now into more of the capital side of the equation here, we do assess what we call a transportation development tax. That's essentially a transportation system development charge. This is also imposed countywide, and it's based on the assumed amount or estimated amount of traffic generated by a new development. And the way the program's administered is somewhat unique. It applies across the county, but the county administers the program for the unincorporated areas, and the cities administer the program within their jurisdictional boundaries. Again, it is as a system development charge. It's used for transportation capacity needs, and that can be a variety of things, adding vehicle lanes, adding turn lanes, adding sidewalks, bike lanes, and even transit improvements that help to facilitate people using transit. So capacity can mean a lot of different things here. The TDT rate is adjusted annually, and it's based on a 5-year rolling construction cost index, and then the annual increase is capped at a 10% maximum.
Have we actually, or has anyone assessed since the voters approved the TDT countywide? Has there been a review to see if the current TDT level is actually paying that voter approved 28% of impact? Has there been any verification? That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, Erin, I don't know if you want to, yeah, Erin might be able to help speak to that a little bit more, but I think what we do know is that it probably isn't bringing in the same amount of revenue that we had anticipated, or the share, if you will, of revenues. And that just happens over time, even with the annual increase, because it is a rolling average, it's a lagging increase. And so I think that's probably a key takeaway there, but Erin may know a little bit more.
We actually calculate it every year as a part of updating the TDT eligible project list. And so at the very bottom of the whole project list, we can look at the comparison of basically the amount of money we think we need in order to build those capacity improvements. And it is decreasing over time. So I think the number now is somewhere near 22%, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to go back and look at the project list again.
So I would ask for follow-up, not for answering now, does the voter approval allow for some systematic adjustment so that we continue to hold true to the voter direction?
So a larger improvement or larger adjustment than the annual adjustment than we already do every year.
I think it'd be a separate adjustment.
Yeah.
Because this
Get it up to
adjustment
that
isn't-
level.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We can look at that.
And along that line, have we ever hit the maximum 10% increase? Are we projected to with construction costs changing so dramatically?
I don't believe we have ever adjusted 10% in the past. I do know that we are projecting a 6% adjustment for this year as of right now. That may not be the final number. There could still be some adjustment to that, but our preliminary calculation is 6%.
Yeah, I think we have to go back to what the ballot statement was and see how we're doing. Because it was said that, okay, so new construction will pay for up to 28%, but then that means there's still the 82%. And now we're just widening that gap further, knowing that we're only falling further and further behind. So just what are we dealing with? That's all.
Yeah,
But
We can do that.
yeah, we'll definitely follow up.
thank you.
Okay. Moving along. So there are a couple of specific new development areas that I thought were important to highlight here too. So in the North Bethany area and the Bondy Slope West area, both in Commissioner Teresa's district, those were urban growth boundary expansions that occurred in 2002 and 2006, as I recall. And in those new greenfield development areas, we identified that certainly the needs for transportation infrastructure are going to be significant, and that we were looking to development to help fund a larger share of that than we had done in the past. To your point, Chair, so that we weren't continuing to fall even further behind on our existing system deficiencies.
And if I'm correct, those were voter approved as well.
The
Smaller number of property owners in those areas,
Yes.
but
Right, exactly. So in North Bethany, we have two components. We have a transportation system development charge. And then we also have a property tax district, a special district called the North Bethany County Service District for Roads, and it levies its own property tax of $1.25 per $1,000 of assessed value on properties in that district. And so that is definitely helping to take a big bite out of infrastructure needs in the North Bethany community. In Bondy Slope West, we simply adopted a transportation system development charge, but not an ongoing property tax levy there.
I don't have any
Oh,
questions.
okay.
I just, it's interesting to me, and I recognize that it's because of the historical nature here, but this is the only area where we've been able to do that.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and I would add that most of the cities, since most urban growth boundary expansions are now happening in cities, they're taking similar approaches in all of these new urban expansion areas.
but this
are-
is urban unincorporated. That's all.
Correct.
I'm just
Yep.
pointing that out.
Yep. Indeed. All right. And grants, you can see in fiscal year 21-22, that was our last full fiscal year that we had data ready for. We received a very small amount of grant funding, but you can see in the bullets on the right side, or the left side rather, that we have gotten some really significant grant awards, and we're going to continue to need to seek grants. And I think that will be an increasingly important share of how we continue to fund our transportation system here. And again, the opportunities will vary significantly depending on availability of different grant programs and their timelines. And we will, obviously, as we try to pursue grants, we will need to ensure that we have local matching funds available. And the grants, again, can vary in terms of what they fund. Some may just fund planning, some may fund project development, some may fund construction, some may fund all three. And then you'll see the examples there. So again, an increasingly important aspect of how we fund our system. And then MSTIP.
Can I ask
Oh, yeah, sure.
Stephen, the grants piece of it? I was under the impression that the Hope grant went to Washington County and Metro.
No,
Is
that actually went to TriMet and Metro.
Right.
Okay.
But I thought it was Metro and Washington County, okay, they're met, okay. And I'm interested in learning more about these grants. But where can I find updates on any information? Like the
Ask. I
council?
actually have a draft memo here where we're fleshing out
Oh, okay.
additional information
Yummy.
about grants. And again, with the recent Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, there are several new programs that are rolling out. And so we're trying to track the rollouts of those programs and working with our federal lobbyist and our GR team as well, trying to help ensure that we stay abreast of those opportunities. All right, so moving on, Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, MSTIP. So that you all, I think, probably know the history. It started as a series of serial levies beginning in 1986, went through 3 voter approvals as serial levies. And then in the mid 1990s, as a result of Measure 50, the then current levy rate was cut and then rolled into the county's base property tax rate. So it actually helped increase the total amount of the county base property tax rate that was frozen back at that time. And since that time, your board has allocated funding on roughly 5-year cycles to continue that program. And so it is a general fund transfer that supports this program. And again, it is the lion's share of our capital improvement program funding. We have used that money, I think, quite effectively. We've used it in many ways to leverage other resources. So it serves oftentimes as grant matching funds, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Opportunity Fund. And then the primary parameters around the program eligibility, we're looking to improve safety, enhance our capacity or traffic flow, fixing congestion, if you will. The funding is limited to major roads that are used by a lot of our county residents. And so there is a map that you'll may remember called the System of Countywide Interest. And so that's an eligibility criteria for funding, as a road needs to be on that map, which was developed in partnership with our cities through the Washington County Coordinating Committee and then by your board. And then we are looking to address the needs for all different kinds of travel. So we need to make sure that we're not just accommodating cars, but we're accommodating bicycles and pedestrians and transit use.
Before you leave that slide, we have unspent money in MSTEP money, correct? That
we have funding in our bank account, so to speak, but that money's all spoken for and then some.
It's spoken for, but where does any investment opportunity up from that, in other words, interest, is there interest that it's a considerable amount of money too, right? Where does that go?
It's not here. Yeah, if there are interest earnings, then they would roll back into the fund. Interest earnings have been
Flat, I know,
nominal,
but
if
it's,
any. Yeah, over the last few years. Yep. That's a good question. Let's see. Okay, so the Opportunity Fund I just mentioned. So again, that's really been a great source for leveraging other funding. And so we've been able to earmark, your board has earmarked a portion of our MSTIP funding allocations to this purpose. And the Washington County Coordinating Committee helps to prioritize applications. And we've had a almost 60% success rate in going after grants using MSTIP Opportunity Fund matching, which is quite good. And so we're averaging around $6 in external funding for every $1 in Opportunity Fund that we've been using. So we feel that's a really good return on our investment there. And I wanted to touch on the bonding cost sharing program. So that was a sort of an offshoot, if you will, or almost a parallel type program that's housed within the MSTIP program. And it really was a partnership as we were looking at both our North Bethany and Bonnie Slope West urban growth boundary expansion areas, but also South Hillsborough, South Cooper Mountain, and River Terrace areas. And so we identified that there were really significant needs, investment needs in those areas, many of which were on some of the major county roadways that will serve as the backbone system, both within those areas, but also for a lot of folks that are just moving through those areas or adjacent to those areas. So we agreed on an approach where the county and the cities that benefit, or in our case, the unincorporated areas, we use MSTIP funds to pay for 2/3 of the project costs. And then either the city or the county, in our case, find other available funding sources to pay for the remaining 1/3 of the project. And really, one of the purposes of this program was to allow us to continue to maintain an MSTIP program to address existing needs in other parts of the county, while also trying to move with some urgency on trying to ensure that we weren't falling even further behind in some of these new growth areas. And I mentioned earlier our transit services that falls under the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, or STIF, and that was funded primarily by a 1.1% employee payroll tax that's dedicated for transit operations and capital work. And again, I want to give a shout out to Chris. She's been really instrumental in helping get that work up and running, and coordinates our transit committee that the chair also serves as the chair for. So we appreciate their good work. And then Commissioner Rogers, I know, serves on a regional committee that also helps to prioritize how these funds are used. So we've been using that again, as I mentioned, Community Connector and Last Mile Solutions and services in rural areas. And then that work is guided by a transit development plan that's updated every biennium. The Urban Road Maintenance District is an interesting hybrid. We use that funding both for maintenance and preservation of the system, but we also use it for improvements. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it is a county service district that covers essentially the urban unincorporated parts of the county. It was actually approved by voters, the district, in 1987, but they didn't approve funding for the district until 1994. And the current levy rate that's assessed by the district is just under 25 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. That amount was also part of the Measure 50. The rate that was in effect before was 36 cents. Actually, and it was reduced down to 25 essentially, and then rolled in or became a permanent rate going forward. So we use the Urban Road Maintenance District funds to really take care of our roadways, the local roadways primarily, and neighborhood streets in the urban unincorporated areas. And it essentially helps to provide a city type level of street maintenance within the urban unincorporated neighborhoods. And the maintenance element of URMD specifically excludes arterials and collectors. We use the road fund primarily to help to manage those roadways. But within the urban road maintenance district, your board approved changes to the program in 2011 that allow funding of bicycle and pedestrian improvements using earned funds. And so we are doing some capital work with that funding as well. And we also included arterials and collectors as eligible for these bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And so far to date, we've allocated funding to 62 projects for over $23 million. So that program has lasted longer and achieved more than we'd hoped it would. Initially, we anticipated we had maybe a 5 to 7 year window before the maintenance costs would catch back up and preclude our ability to continue funding sidewalks. But I think through a combination of good system management and our pavement preservation work, we've actually been able to stretch this quite significantly and look to continue this work going forward.
I think they should share with the rural road district. Just saying.
Yeah.
Nope.
The voters had an opportunity to create a rural road district and opted not to.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
But that's also been,
I know.
that's also been 35 years ago.
Done it.
Yeah.
And there is the advisory committee that is very active on.
Yes.
That's
Rural road.
So it's the railroads one, you know. You'd like to look over the fence. See what you
Next
have.
slide.
Back to engaging our community and our work here.
That's right.
And then gain share, you've been talking a lot about this, but this, as you know, is a share of state income taxes that come back to Washington County through the strategic investment program. And so there is a portion of that funding has been allocated to doing bicycle and pedestrian projects that were identified in our school access improvement study. So that's $2 million per year. And that was for the years 2015 through, I believe, 2025, that funding was.
So here's where I have an issue with this slide. It's the legal nature of committed funding through 2025. Boards can do revenue bonds, right? Which part of gain share was, but I'm not sure the revenue bond was written for the policy areas. So
are you,
I'm questioning that we're committed to follow the policy decisions for the areas of the investment.
so, and are those safe routes to schools? Is that,
Yeah, we completed a study in 2015 that was called Safe Access and School Access Improvement Study. And so it identified
I just
primarily
wanted a
sidewalks.
clarification. And you're saying the bond didn't make us do that?
I'm asking about the committed funding through 2025.
She's saying that's a policy, not a
Yeah.
rule.
Yep, I would agree. I think that is a board.
So I think that
Policy
wording
decision that was-
is difficult.
Mhm.
A board cannot commit future boards except in certain areas.
Well, and I think what you're saying is that it wasn't built into the bond. That's the issue, right? And if it's not built into the bond, then
Well,
the.
I
current
didn't
board
word
has
it
the
this way,
flexibility.
so I'm raising a flag on the wording.
Okay, yeah, fair.
So maybe the way to say that is in 2015, the board at the time identified allocations, and to date, those have been honored each year. Yeah. So in addition to the
We've not been in a position
Hmm.
yet to weigh in. I've been complaining about it for 4 years, so I'm complaining again.
And as a reminder, that conversation will come back to the board this fall of this year.
To not belabor this point, I just want to make sure I understand that I think what I'm hearing from the chair is the statement, the board in 2016 committed funding through 225, and the issue is you can't do that. Right?
You can commit the payment of debt service, right? You can you can commit the county for issuance of debt service that has a payment schedule.
Yes, I understand that. If you owe the money.
That's
you
what
owe the
I'm
money.
familiar
Yeah.
with, so. But I'm not a lawyer, so that's why I'm asking.
All right. So in addition to the 2 million that was identified for the bike and pedestrian improvements, there's an additional 600,000 per year that's been allocated for traffic management and congestion projects. And those are identified in the county's intelligent transportation system plan. And I think there has been some confusion in the past in the simple spreadsheets about gain share. There's ITS for intelligent transportation systems, and there's also information technology systems.
Yes, and we need to stop creating
Two.
that problem.
Yeah, two different things.
Yeah, so you, in that schedule, you combine it and it's $1 million, but this part is only 600, because I remember that schedule showing $1 million, didn't it?
And I believe that is the information technology systems allocation is the 1 million per year.
But that's not this one.
Versus intelligent.
Correct.
One's for traffic lights, the others for computers.
Right.
Traffic light
ITS is
computers
I know.
versus
And-
infrastructure.
And
At the board's work session, you had asked for
Or
a
there.
follow-up. And part of that follow-up is clarifying each of those categories, which we will make sure to clarify and have a distinction between the two.
But it will be nicely clear in our proposed budget.
Indeed.
It's all good work.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
Agreed.
confusing.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I just wanted to, I think, just briefly acknowledge private development I mentioned earlier. So we do have developers who invest quite a lot of their funds in helping to improve the transportation system. And that really is a critical component of how we deliver on the build out of the transportation system. And through our process of development review, we often require developers to construct certain roadway improvements. If you think about a residential subdivision, the developers obviously have to build their internal roadways to provide access to the lots they're going to build homes on and sell. But then they also often have to improve the adjacent major roadway too. And there may even be further afield offsite improvements that they're required to build in order to help alleviate their transportation impacts on the roadway system. And then back to the transportation development tax, developers are often able to receive credits against their TDT payment obligations for building certain credit eligible improvements on the system. And so when you look at the actual cash amount of TDT that we receive, it doesn't look like a big amount, but there are a lot of improvements that get built by developers that the developer received a certain amount of credit for. And that actually, while it reduces the amount of cash coming into the system, it yields some significant improvements on the system itself.
So, question
Yes.
for later time. But just as the TDT dollar collections the value has eroded over time, trying to leverage the wording of Ms. Wardell. I'm not sure if I put that correctly, so please give me that. Have the credits similarly had that same devalue, or are the credits provided to the actual cost of a construction value per year versus generalized over a rolling 5 years? You know, are they equal or not is essentially the simplest way to put it. I don't know.
I think
I'm
there
not
may be-
trying to create a full-fledged evaluation,
Yeah.
but at some point that should be assessed by someone, though not necessarily in the constrained environment we currently find ourselves in.
Right. I will say that the credits are based on actual construction costs. So the contractors actually submit invoices for the work that they've completed, and then credits are issued based on that. Yeah.
Yep. So I think it's probably uneven,
Mhm. Yep. That's,
but we still get something constructed, which is a good thing too.
I'm jotting myself a
You
note.
might have said this already. But when's the last time the TDT rate was increased?
It increases annually, and so we'll actually be bringing forward, I believe in April, our annual increase. So there is an index that considers construction costs, right-of-way costs, and labor cost. And it runs on a 5-year rolling average. And so I think Aaron was saying we're anticipating about a 6% increase in this upcoming year.
And then that come through the WCCT
It does.
and there's a recommendation to us.
Yes, yep.
And the voters approved that like in 2015,
2008, actually,
2008.
Mhm.
Yeah, during the Great Recession.
just
Yeah.
on the beginning.
I
of the
remember
recession,
that. 'Cause
indeed.
there were lots of delays.
Yeah, and there were phase-in,
Closing
the
delays.
phase-in period of the TDT was actually stretched out in order to
Yeah,
alleviate some of the distress during the recession. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Even I have a question on the second bullet point.
yeah.
Developers are required to construct new roads and improve existing roads. I think my conversation was it with you, Aaron, Chris, somebody, 209th,
Mhm.
Reed's Crossings area. Developers are improving half the road, so it's not really constructing new roads, it's half the roads is what their
because it
requirement
wasn't
is.
entirely in their development area. It was adjacent.
Right.
The adjacent. So does that mean they are required to do full road improvements?
No, it depends on where the road is.
Yeah, the short answer is it's complicated.
Yeah.
But in some cases,
Road length was over here versus inside.
Yeah, but there is an improvement going on 209th because of that development, but then it's halfway, not full way.
correct,
And then there's a part where the county is also
right, improving the
improving.
full road.
So there's like junctions of it, like the developers are doing, so
Right.
how does this bullet point change that practice? Or does
So,
it?
yeah, again, this is a very high level tour, so
okay.
this could be a good off follow-up conversation, but you'll often hear us refer to what we call a half street, and that's the developer may be required to improve their half of the roadway adjacent to their development site. In some cases, if a roadway is completely within their boundaries, they may be required to construct or improve the entire roadway, both sides. And so the impact of the development really dictates the amount of improvements and the level of improvements that we can require from the developer. It's a case-by-case determination.
What was the other half MSTIP money?
In those cases, that leaves some existing obligations. So it could be another development might pick up those costs, or there may be a future public project that helps to pick up those improvements. So again, it varies quite a bit.
But the road is being improved. The whole road is being improved, not just half of it.
No, half the road.
Yeah, and in many cases, it might just be half.
Creasing Rod's creasing cross Reed.
Reed's Crossing.
Oh my
Crossing.
goodness, why am I having a hard time this?
It's late.
Reed's Crossing, I pass by every day. It's behind, there is very fully developed the roads. I think the part it's on the adjacent, what the chair,
Right.
what I
Yeah.
was saying.
It
but-
it can result in a little bit of a patchwork quilt effect.
Yeah.
But you know, it
Patchwork quilt,
is
that's the
chipping
thing.
away at the.
Really better way to say it.
Yep. Oh, sorry. So again, as I mentioned, we're really hoping today just to kind of set the stage for some future conversations. So looking forward a little bit here at this point. So our needs will just continue to exceed our funding, just like every other subject area that your board's dealing with. And so prioritizing will remain an essential element of our work. And of course, equity focus and community engagement are going to be key for how we're going to allocate those funds. Cost escalation, no surprise, is just creating lots of challenges for all agencies and all parts of, I'm sure, our operations. And we know that it's just going to take longer to build the system out that we envision building because of those increasing costs. And again, we will continue looking for additional revenue sources. So, and as I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done with this slide. I'll wait.
Oh, okay. Well, I just, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but wanted to reiterate, as we continue to pursue additional funding sources like grants, we will need to ensure that we do have a source of local matching funds, obviously. And we know that there are also going to be some future requests for larger transit projects, Southwest Corridor, probably a bus rapid transit on TV Highway at some point. And so the TriMet and Metro, our local partners, are also going to be looking to local agencies to help with local funding for those projects. The federal government will pay a significant share, but the locals also need to come up with a significant share. So we're also anticipating that there are some bigger needs that are even above and beyond the county infrastructure system that we own and or not own, but that we operate.
And so part of what I'm on the lookout for is I would like to take a deep breath and find out, what does cost escalation mean for the MSTIP projects that are already on the books? And because there may be some that are approved for construction, but for cost escalation, time is ticking, right? Because we have to wait until we have the money to pay those bills.
Correct.
And then also there are other projects that where design was approved and maybe a certain portion of right of way. Well, what happens if we pencil out what a cost guesstimate, and I'm using that word a lot lately, guesstimate, because I'm not holding staff accountable for a guesstimate, right? It's a swag.
Technical term.
Put in other audiences. Then when it comes to planned major transit projects, there are those that are in the RTP already, and land use has been actioned upon based upon that, Southwest Corridor being one of them, and everything that's happening in the Tiger Triangle is dependent upon Southwest Corridor being built. And pretty soon we need to be careful, or a big clamp is going to come down and say, you have a building moratorium because you've taken no steps to actually finance that to build it. Versus say the BRT on TV Highway, which I would love to see improved transit on TV Highway, and that will hopefully spur a lot more new development. But if that isn't in the RTP yet, then how do we account for those obligations we've already placed on ourselves? Ooh, cringe. You know, I don't want us to just keep stealing from Peter to pay Paul, to use that old phrase. Lastly, I want to say your department is very creative and innovative, and I continue to be impressed by that and practicing the art of the possible. Thank you very much.
We have a really good team.
Yep.
Takes lots of partnership and hard work.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And so that really ties in very well with the last bullet there. Really, we just think we're going to need to continue exercising creativity and be innovative as we continue to think about how we're going to achieve some of the community outcomes that we think are important in terms of our transportation system, and moving forward with some of those most critical improvements.
Yep.
I have a question directed to you, Chair. Well, I understand the scenario that you painted about Southwest Corridor and potential building moratorium. I'm not sure I understand who's the body that would impose a moratorium.
Well, I don't know. The Oregon Transportation Planning Rule required that in order for certain land use actions to be enabled in the Tiger Triangle, we had to go through the work to plan and commit to Southwest Corridor through the state. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It could
Well,
be
I understand
LCDC for all I know.
I understand the path you are on there, and I get that, but I just wasn't sure. Wait a minute, who does that?
And while I was a Metro counselor, we went through this line of thinking of, well, for anywhere in the region, what are the implications? And the state can just withhold funding, particularly transportation funding, to a local community if certain things aren't met. And I think way back when it was through ELCD. I'm not even sure if it had to go to LCDC. But it's not something you want, and that's why we usually try to be judicious about taking care of things.
I was just curious about the process.
Yeah.
Or potential process.
So are you saying the Tiger Triangle is contingent to the Southwest Corridor?
Yep. Land use. Yep.
That was in our tour, didn't come up.
Well, building up fast and placing it on time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just looking at Ms. Deffelbach. I think we'll probably be drafting a memo for you as well, just on Southwest Corridor and maybe in relation to the regional transportation plan work that's going on too. So I think getting at your point, it's a valid,
Ahead of ourselves.
it's a valid topic of concern.
Use we loosely.
The big we.
Yep.
That's right. And as I mentioned, today's really informational, and we're just trying to help set the stage for some upcoming briefings. So we'll be back on February 7th in 3 weeks to talk a little bit more about MSCIP, and specifically, Chair, we are working on trying to finalize an updated assessment of cost to complete our remaining committed projects, and then how that will dovetail, hopefully, with the idea that we're looking to also prioritize another list of future projects. And so we'll be starting to work to try to pull those things together. And then we'll be back on March 7th again. And then on the 14th of March, we'll also be talking again about the countywide capital improvement plan process. So keeping you up to date on how that work is going as well.
And do feel empowered to define a term of art that does relate to guesses. Assumptions based on certain circumstances. We're just looking for some guidance, but I don't want you to feel like, oh, it's going to come back to bite us in the future just because we did the best we could do to provide information for these dates.
There should be a swag watermark, like there's confidential, there's draft, there should be this is a swag.
No, we can violate it somehow, but I have about 4 things. Never word if you're ready for questions. The first one of the hidden costs, in my opinion, for the unincorporated urban areas has always been that if they were in a city, the gas tax that would come to Washington County, and I used to know this number, but populations have changed, would be significant in terms of additional dollars. As we begin to analyze the cost of service of areas in the urban unincorporated area, can you do a simple calculation? It's based on population, and vehicle registration, to say how much are we losing by folks saying, I don't want to have anything to do with any city, and the county it's as a whole, therefore subsidizing that by the loss of that revenue. MSTIP is happening to go to those areas where we would have additional state funds. So that's number one. Number two is I think, Catherine, you brought up that committed is a good term. I happen to agree that when we can't commit, but here's the problem in the policy. When we first did this way back when, is when we got the cities together in the county, we said that we would make some understanding of commitments for periods of time because it takes time to plan, engineer, and to put particular facilities in. So as we discuss that policy, I think it might be good to understand what the gestation period is from beginning of getting on the list to delivery, because I can assure you, nobody's going to want to be last on the list. They want to be year one.
And you're talking about those clean share dollars from 11 to
Talking about MSTA dollars, anything. Yeah. If we've committed monies to do things like safe routes to school, trails, we did a lot of different things because it was knowing there was going to be a build out. You may not get yours today. You might be 5 years down the road, but that was a problem.
We haven't run it that way, though.
We haven't run it that way, but technically, can we commit to a future period? Your question's a good one. I mean, can you do that? Can future boards commit? And what is that period? Be careful in regard, it's just Roy's comment in regard to that 72-28% split. Because one of the things that didn't happen was a good adjustment, and I get asked that question all the time. And one of the reasons that we wanted the private sector to do that was, quite frankly, they do it cheaper. We knew that. We got a lot of bang for the buck, so figure it out. Those rates should have been adjusted to make certain that it was at the 20%. But the calculation of what's in the 28% is the interesting factor, because if you, as a Davis Bacon and all the rest of your provisions would say that's a $500,000 project, and they're saying we're doing it for 400,000, are you going to say, I'm not going to give you credit? And so that was always the issue in there. And so I don't know that there's a good way to handle it. It's an excellent question, because I've been asked that too. Well, these people who are doing these things are not paying 20%. So what is that 20%? How do you calculate that benefit to having it currently done, current dollars versus us waiting? And the last thing, I shouldn't even say this, because I'll get crucified down home, but in regard to the 70 seconds, it's a good question on the triangle. For those of us who paid a lot of development taxes, and we never see any improvements that go elsewhere. That's not this board's issue. But a lot of cities, they have these latitude of putting their money wherever they want to put it. And so it's always an issue of, to the jurisdictions, place back money where they get it. And the answer is they don't have to. And so Bull Mountain Road is a good example. And that's a little different than Triangle, but millions and millions of development fees have been collected all up on that mountain. And you still see the same road that you always have, and it's still owned by the county. And so if the jurisdiction would have done some things there, you wouldn't have non-sidewalks, you wouldn't have ditches. And so it's an understanding that we have to have with our city partners, that you can't collect it and put it elsewhere and then say that there's this problem. County system. It's been a historical issue. So anyway, those are my quick forward comments.
So is that to say you would like to see a review of where TDTs have been collected, both from the county and the city, and where they've been expended?
I think it would be a curious exercise, but I wouldn't go that far because I don't think our staff has the time. But it would be a great exercise to see it. If you had lots of time, it'd be wonderful information.
Yeah, I appreciate your point. Again, it's a complicated discussion, and the revenues are collected on new development. Much of the Bull Mountain area was developed before we actually required developers to build those frontage improvements. So a number of subdivisions happened without those improvements, and those remain needs. And as your board and other city councils receive their TDT funding, they have discretion to determine what their highest priorities are, and it may not be the road necessarily abutting where that revenue was generated.
So the answer is, yeah, it would be wonderful, but I don't think we have time, but it would be certainly an interesting exercise.
Well, I think before a tool is, I mean, we're now at 15 years that the TDT was approved. So I think before the tool is 20 years old, there should be some assessment.
I don't think that's not reasonable. Just go back and see if it works.
Yeah.
That seems like a reasonable approach.
Yeah, and there may be some roads where the road and portions of the properties along the arterial are still unincorporated, but there could be some new developments that were annexed into cities along the way, so that TDT was collected in the city and not spent on the arterial.
And there, you see them nodding back there, yeah.
Yeah.
We pay the tab as a county. But they
I've
don't.
canvassed in some of those.
You did?
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that is and this may be an opportune time, I think, as we alluded to, just needing to think about all of our different revenue sources and ensuring that we, I think, are maximizing where we can and taking advantage of different opportunities to bring funding into the systems. Opportune.
Yep.
All right.
Any other commissioner questions or comments? A lot of really good information that I think will benefit us as we go through those future work sessions.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate your time.
So has
It'll be your
anything
audit.
come up that we need to wrap up on or anything we
your audit.
forgot earlier?
Forgot the town hall to come back to. the
Oh,
town
yes, we did.
What?
What?
Town hall. So first of all, I made a mistake. I stated the wrong date. So it's actually February 23rd, not the 22nd. That the town hall has been scheduled for. It will be hybrid, meaning in the auditorium and also having a virtual space for community to participate. Correct. We're continuing to work with our translation service providers, ALS and Spanish, to determine how the experience works for community participating and how to continue to streamline that, both from a cost and also process standpoint. For context, for a hybrid, we need to have virtual room and also in person. So we'll continue to work on that. But we are really leaning on our translation contractor to provide their recommendations, not just our recommendations, and especially from staff who may not need ASL or Spanish translation. So we'll continue to work through that. Right now, the staff is working on kind of what the run of show would be. I should state, we scheduled it tentatively from 6 to 7 p.m.
23rd?
On the February 23rd. Mhm.
This is the budget.
This is the
Board of
budget town hall,
Committee, the Board of
Commissioners town
One
hall.
Town Hall. To
This-
go over the budget.
Correct. This is the one town hall that I received direction from the board to start to work on, and then the board will come back in February at your roundtable and talk about future town halls. So I think the question is, and Jerry, I just saw you hold up your finger as one. Do you want longer than that?
I'm just wondering if the community might have more questions with regard to the budget. I mean, if the town hall, we don't have questions, we just end it, right?
I'm gonna be
5
gone.
hours, right?
I'm gonna be gone, so I don't.
Wait a minute, you both, you were.
I'm
gone.
No, she said 6 to
You're gonna
7.
be gone.
I
too?
said 6 to 7, so
So yeah,
Just
like
an hour.
6
3 to
to
4 hours.
6
All your
to
jobs are gone.
8, 6 to
On the budget.
7:30. What would you?
Yeah, an hour,
budget.
just an hour. That's not enough.
I
'Cause
would
we
just
can-
say till 7:30 and we can
Okay.
end earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
Kind of cut
for the two hybrids that we've had, just the logistics of setup and all that jazz.
That's
takes
5
it
to
will
10
be just
minutes.
Three of us.
I'll be there. I'll be in the auditorium.
Wait a minute, what's going on?
I'm completely out of town. I'm not-
Oh, you're out of town and you're out of town. Oh, should we reschedule then or?
We talked about this before and it
We did?
was, yep, we did.
Mhm.
And it's like, if you're not gonna be there, we'll keep, instead of trying to, one of the problems that we ended up on that night that went forever, the day that never ended, was because we were trying to accommodate everybody. So,
Yeah.
Knock on wood, we all make it, 3 of us.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We all
so
have a town.
It'll be recorded.
staff
no.
tried to accommodate schedules
Yep.
with the NACO legislative conference in February and the time sensitivity of having this, it just three's the best number we could get to.
Yep.
It's
I'm just
Thursday,
pointing it
I'm
out.
available. Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything else? Go team, go. We're hereby adjourned. Thank you.